Beyond these pages lies a world of gods, monsters, betrayal, and impossible power.
A 34-year-old man with long hair emerges in a completely destroyed city, convinced that place could only be hell. With his sword in hand, he wondered how everything had gone so terribly wrong. He pondered whether, if he had learned fencing earlier, he might have been able to prevent his sister from being sent to the Empire. If that had happened, maybe he wouldn't have become the monster he was. He was already tired of everything. Besides, he could have met his master in a scenario very different from that one. A girl with black hair stares deeply at him when he met her made his last some facts about his master, about how he expected the best moments of his life with him, and how the man meant much more than just a savior to him. Sighing, he concluded that he would have treated him better if he had known he would regret it this much. Sitting with his sword all dirty with ink, the fighter pants with exhaustion, and looking at the damage he had caused in the village, he was certain that wasn't what he wanted. Until someone holding a sword walked toward him, which alarms the young man. A little boy points the sword at him, trembling with fear. It was somewhat pitiful to see that scene. So the man says he wanted childer and trembling fear at that. But the brat keeps the blade pointed at his face, claiming he had killed his father. For a moment, the young man sings regretful, but then he mocks the boy's feelings, which makes Jack even more upset, calling him a monster. Deep down, a man cared about what the kid was going to say, but monster was already a nickname he was used to. At that moment, he was more concerned about his body tingling and throbbing with pain. He felt a sharp pain and a sensation that his brain might melt at any moment, constantly sending signals to stop and just end everything. However, staring at the blonde boy, he knew he had to hold on a little longer, just a little longer. Then he asked, "A monster?" Following up by saying that he was the monster, since he had destroyed all the masters by himself and ended the great nation of the Tulkun Empire and the imperial family. The man asks if the boy knew how many people he had already annihilated, leaving the child speechless. Smiling proudly, he claims to have destroyed more than hundreds of thousands, so it was kind of obvious he was a monster. As words managed to get into the little blonde's head, who trembles even more while trying to keep the sword raised. Seeing the boy like that reminded him of when he was a young monster himself, and he asks his name. But when the boy replies, Jack Stewart, the warrior's expression changes completely. He comments that, coincidentally, his name was also Jack. Bursting into laughter, he says he had taken down a lot of people, but didn't remember any Stewart. The brat's voice comes out trembling as he explains that even if his father wasn't much, he was still father he needed to have. Stopping to think, the man could even feel envy. Still, he wouldn't apologize for what he did, but he would give the boy a chance instead, leaving the blind confused. Pointing to the boy's sharp sword, he tells him to use the object to stab him. He was squatting cold from the whole situation and seemed more lost than ever. But the man just insists that it was the perfect opportunity for him to avenge his father and be adored as the hero who defeated the monster. And he knew he could escape even with his leg and some organs injured, but that wasn't what he wanted. So he kept provoking the kep, and some filing what he wanted the sword, so trembling to strike him. However, all he does is fall to his knees in front of the monster. Seeing the tears streaming down his face, the man is surprised by the fact that the boy couldn't bring himself to kill him. He caresses the boy's hair, congratulating him because he knew he wouldn't live in peace as he went through with it. After all, a hero would carry many names on his back, and he advises him to live without regrets like he did, because unlike the man, a little blonde was still young. All he did was break down in tears as usual. Slowly, the long-haired man's determination weakened. Then he asked the child to tell the others that the demon was finished, and so was the war, which made the little one ask, "Old man, why? With all that power, why did you choose her live like this?" He held on to his sword, searching for strength to explain, but collapsed to the ground before he could finish. That was the end. He could feel the sensations in his fingers leaving like a balloon losing air. His vision blurred, and even though he didn't want to, his eyes slowly closed. At the moment he forgot to breathe, all the sounds around him vanished. In that last moment of life, one thought pursued his mind. If he started everything from zero, would it be possible to change this pitiful ending? That's when he emerged into himself as if he were dreaming. As if for a moment he was just a child again. He remembered his father, who questioned whether he was really his biological son, and the death of his mother right after he was born. His older sister, who was known for her beauty throughout the continent, and even half-brother who constantly bullied him. He remembered everything. After abandoning the name Jack Valantier, he became a swordsman and traveled the whole continent. His memory was flash and bow. He came to the point where he was confused about whether he was dreaming or not. Had he really died? And now he was seeing the end of his life flashing before him. Sweet and cold, a little boy was on the verge of a nervous breakdown. Memories of the Second Continental War emerged in his mind. He was victorious or ruthless ruler and the greatest monster among all present monsters. His inner self, driven by revenge, destroyed the Tulkun Empire and dominated the Western continent by wiping out everyone who bore the Tulkun name. After declaring victory, he was happy to have achieved his goals. Then by his own will, he was happy to his imminent passing as he had no further reason to remain. That's how his heart stopped. But if that was the case, what the hell was happening? The little boy in question was Jack himself, as if he had gone back to the past. Desperate, he wondered how that was possible, pinching himself to be sure it wasn't just an illusion. He was in the volunteer Marcus house, a renowned family in the Teslan kingdom, and belonged to the loyal group that supported the king. There he was the youngest among the siblings, the youngest member of the family that held the Marcus title in the kingdom. If he hadn't been grieved for the Hell's title, the king lived the more comfortable life, that his Hell's was an extinction. Strolling through the rose garden, the boy contemplated the place he knew so well. It could be called an annex, as it was located in the corner of the property. Even though it was beautiful on the outside, it was all an illusion. The place was known as exile. Its only purpose was to completely exclude the youngest son from the outside world, leaving him without any servants or family members to support him. That was the true rose garden. Jack was startled when someone called out to him, saying they brought him something to drink. It was Ron, butler, and hustling omang parsing in that place to do care of the boy. Something, he remarked at the wrong he knew was a clever one. As he took the glass, the little one asked if there wasn't any poison mixed with the juice, which made the servant very nervous. But he quickly explained it was just a joke and thanked him for the care. That made Wrong laugh, asking him not to overdo it, then leaving the boy alone afterward. There were 11 people in that garden at calming the protagonist. One of them was the butler, but the other 10 were just guards constantly watching him. Besides the caretaker, he didn't think anyone else needed to be kept on or watch, which gave him clinging of 3 times. The boy was sure that everything was real, but had no idea he would return to the past, and it had only been an hour since he found out he had gone back. It's not like he had a plan in mind or anything like that. Now he was 14 years old, and even so he didn't have any calluses on his hands and didn't seem to have a mana heart or anything like it. If compared to other children from noble families, he was very inadequate, but there was a good reason for that. He didn't have mana yet at that time. While thinking, a man prepared to hit him from behind on the head. Sent the boy felt unwell, to fees him at with thinking. That's guard damn. That's when he remembered it had been many years since he got smacked on the head. The man commented that he shouldn't distract a dog while it's eating, observing the broken juice cup on the floor. His voice makes Jack tremble. The dark-haired man complained that he hadn't even greeted his older brother upon arrival. It was Phelan Volunteer, his brother 3 years older and the second son of the Marcus family, and also the reason the MC couldn't train mana. Thanks to the abuse and threats from that jerk, he was extremely limited. The boy stared at him with hankshirk. He even answered decades, the image of his brother wouldn't lead his mind. Flashbacks of a day when Phelan spilled a hot drink on his head came rushing back. He called him useless and said he should be wiped out. He shouldn't learn anything, fencing, magic, nothing. Because if he did, Phelan would take it as betrayal to the elder brother. And then, yes, he could destroy him with a good excuse. And you warned that as long as he lived in that house, you would only eat and wear what was given to him. Laughing, the scumbag suggested that might change if Jack obeyed him to the lair. Maybe then he could consider calling him his younger better lest he became a Margmus. Jack was extremely weak when he was younger, and he acknowledged him. After all, everyone in the house saw him as inferior. That's why he was called the disgrace of the house. Of course, he only got that nickname inside. If it leaked out, it would be even more pathetic. A sad excuse for the third son of a Marcus family. The sound of laughter even from the plebeians in his family echoed between them. That's how everyone treated him, and the people who led to all of it with the second son of the family and Count Mantis. It was ridiculous how Phelan behaved, especially since their firstborn wasn't a man, but a woman. She was the only member of that family he could trust and also the only one who cared about the boy. Unfortunately, even being a year older than the middle brother, she couldn't become the family successor because she was a woman. She was just the beautiful firstborn in the family who couldn't inherit the title. She was practically born with her fate written by someone else. She would have a political marriage with a family her father liked and then live trapped in a mansion forever to continue the family lineage. Those were the circumstances at the moment Jack returned, and that guy in front of him was the one who most wanted to use the girl. The son of a bitch who didn't want to be seen with the family's useless one, or be close to his younger sister in the royal court. He deserved to be destroyed at that exact moment, but Jack snapped out of his thoughts when Phelan commented on his eyes. Ready to at the child, he asked how he dared look at him with that gaze. Before he could finish the action, the wood grabbed his wrist, bravely stopping him, which left him very surprised and alerted the garden guards because that kind of thing never happened. Still, Jack remained unshaken, determined not to go through those humiliations a second time. While the man freaked out, shocked at being blocked by someone he considered lower than an insect, our boy was swift and not the bully to the ground with a single blow. On the ground, Phelan asked what his brother thought he was doing. Mocking him, Jack asked if he wanted help getting up or something like that. Unsheathing his sword, the man was already emanating mana as he cursed the little boy with crow nangs. The guards even considered stepping in to help, but that would only further displease the second young master, something the boy had already expected, to be honest. The whole situation felt like a big joke to him. However, before Phelan could do anything, Wrong stepped between the two brothers to stop him, shouting for him to restrain himself and reminding him that he shouldn't use mana in a situation like that. But the man didn't care, punching the servant in the face to get him out of the way. He didn't care about anything. Watching it all, Jack remembered that Wrong's a man with many secrets. Punching a finger in the boy's face too roared, "You arrogant brat, I'll finish you and that servant together." But the MC wasn't shaken. On the contrary, he retorted that his brother talked too much, and asked if he wanted to fight with his mouth instead of his sword. When he finally drew the blade, Jack's eyes filled with hatred as he realized it wasn't just for show. Even without having trained yet and without Manhwa's help, he wasn't confident he would lose. So he charged the man who looked tense at his attacks. His strength was at the third circle, and that was all he had. Even without fancy sword, he was just a spoiled child. And considering his terrible technique, Jack doubted he could cut anyone. The protagonist wondered if he should just throw him to the ground already, but didn't think that was enough. Smiling wickedly, he told Phelan that he needed a lesson to strengthen his mental power, making him nervous. The man didn't even know how to respond. Nothing came out of his mouth but random curses. When someone filled their body with mana like that, they were supposed to include the head too. Thinking that way, Jack shoved his hand into his brother's shameless face. Yet no regrets. He knew it would only be fair to return 100% of the humiliation he had suffered because of that jerk. Each hit left Phelan more and more unbalanced. Ended up knocked to the ground like a coward. That indeed was his place. Jack even checked to see if he was still alive as the brother remained motionless. Everyone watched the boy's every move with nervousness and surprise, realizing Jack's unexpected strength. When he noticed that one of the guards was about to dry his spirit, he quickly ordered them to stop. Warninga, he do know to end up Dr. Brother. He shoots out warders. That was enough to make everyone back off, finding other tasks to do. With that settled, he returned his attention to the idiot falling to the ground, grabbing his hair. The boy dragged him across the floor, suggesting he lose a few pounds, since he was quite heavy carry. Meanwhile, Phelan groaned in pain. They stopped at the edge of a fountain, and the protagonist commented on how hot the day was, asking if the older one wanted to cool off with his help. That's when he shoved the bastard's head into the water without a second thought. How surprised he must have been to not even be able to use that mana he was so proud of. During the torture, Jack reflected on everything that had happened to him because of that son of a bitch. Shortly after his sister had married for the sake of the empire, Phelan eliminated their own father with a drink, taking his place to commit all kinds of atrocities. And the result was clear, as he failed to accomplish anything. That volunteer Marcus family vanished without a trace. Even of all that, the MC had no interest in avenging his family, but he became serious remembering that he had wasted his sister's sacrifice. She was a smart woman with a refined nature. He couldn't even begin to imagine what she felt who she arrived at the Empire. The girl had gone of her own will, the glory of her family, and she must have understood the circumstances of it all. Because the man who took her was the 4th imperial prince, known for every kind of disgusting thing. And he told her even at the altar that she wasn't even the official wife, ordering the girl only to lower her head, obey his commands, and smile. Since his sister loved her family, she endured every kind of mistreatment, nigh to everything. If family or lay family or no hand, she ended up things are different. But Jack preferred not to dwell on it, so he wouldn't explode with rage. The bastard called to him amid the drownings, begging for his pathetic life like an insect. But Jack was already used to that scene after so many years as a monster. It was the expression that everyone who fell into the fear of death constantly wore. So he asked him to think about everything he had done up to that point, all the bad things and insults throughout the boy. But you probably didn't even remember, suggesting that he ought to help him remember. That's why he should experience it directly. Ambi them Rennie Embersing value Fenling. The younger brother's words frightened Phelan. Getting no response, the boy raised his fist, demanding he speak up willingly or not. Finally, the man admitted he was wrong, begging him to stop the torture. However, the child only hesitated when a third person made the same request. Standing at the gazebo, Wrong pleaded for him to end it. His request made the boy grumble softly. Then he smashed his brother's forehead on the edge of the fountain before tossing him to the ground. The boy called one of the guards, who was startled by his voice, and ordered him to get rid of that dead weight of a brother regardless of what his final fate would be. Even if he wasn't finished off for good, he wanted him taken away and out of there. The knight ran toward the young master, concerned about his condition. As Jack passed by Ron, the butler's gaze fell on him as if he couldn't believe he was Kate Wolf all that. It didn't take long for rumors about his actions to spread, which turned the mansion upside down. Phelan was carried into the mansion by 2 servants, frightening a lady with purple hair who fainted at the sight in the Heir's condition. Now the great Heir of the Marcus family was lying in bed with an open wound on his head and an irrational fear of water. In that situation, it was to be expected that things would be out of place. Even with all the chaos, Jack retreated to his room. He saved a slice of cake as if nothing had happened, being closely watched by Ron. The servants whispered throughout the house, wondering how the boy managed to defeat his older brother, someone who had reached the 3rd circle at 17. Wanted MC didn't even know the basics of magic or martial arts. He could have been hiding his stirk, or marches to reveal it at that exact moment. Phelan was to be named next week after his coming-of-age ceremony, which suggested the boy might have coveted the position. The commotion was so great that even his sister was worried about the situation. When the information reached the Lord's ears, he promptly requested the presence of the 3rd son, who continued enjoying his cake, complimenting the delicious taste of a butler who had baked it with such care, until a maid called the servant, informing him of something that caught him off guard. Tense, he informed the boy that the Lord had recosticans preventing the may of building. Then the boy stood up and spent seeing the border the companion, since he was no baby anymore. As an obedient servant, the blonde obeyed the order of his young master, asking only they be careful. The palace was immense, and walking that far made him feel watched. It was strange, since he had been a long time since he had been ignored like that. Even if he didn't care how people saw him, he wished it would be over quickly. Upon arriving at the door, the guards immediately blocked his way. They were treating him as if he were invisible. Even though he thought it was absurd, the boy tried to get the guards' attention politely, but he had no success. Despite a foot under the legs of the two, asking if they couldn't see or hear him, while everyone watched the scene not so discreetly. If it were the Jack from the past, he would have left after seeing the disgusted look on the knight's face, but he wouldn't do that this time. Smiling, he told them to stop making that dumb face before he smashed them. That yes provoked a reaction from the guard, who wanted to make sure he had heard right. Then the boy kicked the bastard's knee, making him fall to the ground, and said he wouldn't ask twice. He explained that he had been summoned by the Lord, so he wanted to know why they wanted letting him in. The response came out in a trembling voice as the man said he couldn't say, which led him to conclude he had been made to wait up there for nothing. They probably expected a scene where they would say Jack wasn't worthy of being there and would only be allowed and after repenting, but the boy turned his back on the servant. When asked where he was going, he asked where else, leaving the guard speechless. Then Jack asked him to inform the Lord that if he had something to say, he could come to his quarters, because he wouldn't stay there for that nonsense. He had finally gotten angry. That's what the two concluded. One of the Lord's servants entered his office to inform him that the boy had left, apologizing for the situation. He gave an ass smile upon hearing that, realizing the youngest had really changed. Meanwhile, in the rose garden, the boy had a snack, certain he received a visitor soon. Something called his attention on the horizon. Speak of the devil, there was the Lord, accompanied by his herd of servants and relatives as usual. There was written all over his face how stubborn he was. Jack couldn't help but laugh because the man hadn't changed at all from when he remembered. He thought his father was a ghost after all. A man had tried to end Jack in his previous life. He was the type of person who would hand his child over to a thumb for power, because that's exactly what he had done. The man was hungry for powers beyond reach and lacked the ability to perceive his own ambitions. He welcomed the old man he could never call father. But the man wasn't interested in formalities, asking why he had done what he did, to which the boy responded with another question. He wanted to know what he was talking about. That sparked anger in the purple-haired lady, who screamed, asking how he dared speak like that to the Lord. Either way, Jack suggested they go inside to talk more comfortably, though they could stay out here if they preferred. Then, an absurd amount of mana poured out of the old man, who seemed to be checking whether the boy had secretly formed in mana heart. Concluding that wasn't the case, he commented that the boy had a knack for martial arts, and asked why he had hidden it until now. Although the real answer was, "You wouldn't believe me if I said I went back in time," all Jack said was that he didn't want to. Beyond Woman starts barking again, calling him insolent, and Amir said we call on her. However, she goes silent when War commands it, as he wanted to comment that the boy wasn't entirely useless, as he once thought. This sparks the protagonist's anger, who questions whether he wouldn't be his son if he were useless. He is asked if he wants the Marcus to recognize him as his son, but Jack isn't interested in such things right now. The old man turns around, saying he understood the youngest, and walks away. Jack watches them all leave. He doesn't understand why he came to meet him only to leave without even getting slightly angry. Remembering his stepmother, the angsty threw a shade, saying that after what happened to Ristan, many wrinkles have shown up and she should take better care of herself. Her face burns with rage of such concern, making her nearly break her fan because of that insolent brat. A smile appears on Jack's face. The woman never helped him with anything, so seeing that expression was deeply satisfied. He stands up, bows, and asks them to send his regards to the second son, ironically of course. Back in his room, the butler announces, Jack Valantier, third son of the family, is sentenced to 20 days of solitary confinement. They're causing a commotion in the mountain. But suddenly, Rong hesitates and asks what happened while he was gone, and the MC tells him to be quiet so as not to distract him from his activities. He knew Rong would ignore him if Phelan beat him, so why was he mad now? Stopping his drawing for a second, the boy reflects on how interesting solitary confined it is. He had already been exiled to the Rose Garden, so he couldn't imagine what would be different in solitary. It would just be a room. Pulling in from his thoughts, the butler comments that there was less than a month left of the academy break, and he was already being confined. Jack freezes in confusion, yet completely forgotten about his studies since he'd been living a different life for so long. Now he's 14 years old, which means he must attend the Imperial Academy. All the aristocrats of the Tesla Empire must study there. If you're not disabled, attendance is physically mandatory every day. It's 4 years of study, starting at age 14, so Jack was still in his first year. The first semester ended, so summer break had begun. It was strange to think of himself as a student again. His masters, directly connected to the academy, could skip any class except hers. That's why he wouldn't waste any more time arguing with his father over nonsense. Thinking rationally, his only option was to go study. There were still 27 days left of vacation. 20 would be spent in prison and 6 days traveling from there to the school. In other words, he'd be sent to study immediately after prison. Even though it was his past, it was hard for INVINCIBLE. With a tired look, Rong asked if the young master had finished painting. Jack stood from his chair, touched the easel, and asked where his confinement would be. The servant's silence quickly irritated the MC, and he repeated the question. Then the blonde explained that there was only one place for the condemned, the prison for criminals who had committed offenses within the Marquis domain. Jack was stunned. He confirmed uncertainly, "I'm going to be thrown in prison?" The answer was yes, which wasn't exactly a surprise. Even so, a cry of frustration escaped him. He couldn't believe that stupid old man was actually capable of that. The Academy's vacation wasn't a break, but an extension of something else. That was clear from Phelan's condition. Before that, he attended social events and met with other noble families. That's how you met the vassals, even. Jack never had any of that. Of course, he wasn't interested in the Marquis' affairs. But what his relatives said enraged him. There was as if there were no place for him there or anywhere else, and now he was locked in a dirty cell. All because of that idiotic old man. They really decided to go to prison alone without waiting for an escort, so he wouldn't completely destroy his dignity. Ron's face as he watched him go was inexplicably pitiful. He wiped tears with a handkerchief and looked at Jack like an abandoned kitten, while the MC just asked them to hurry up. In a way, he was still different from other prisoners. He had a bed, a bathroom, and 3 meals a day. But what's the point of all that when you're locked in a small, cold cell with a blanket that hasn't been changed in half a century, and food so disgusting and bland that not even the flies would eat it? Our boy classes his arms. There's way too much time to think in tired days, and that's too much for a teenager. Aristocrats with land could punish residents however they pleased using local laws instead of imperial ones. In fact, within their territories, they had the same rights as the ruler of the empire. Jack might have been imprisoned by order of the Marquis, but he was still the son, and therefore an aristocrat. It wasn't like it integrated a rebellion or anything, but the Lord decided to imprison his own son anyway. Inviolata's Fane would cover up this incident on behalf of the cited son. He could claim Jack used poison or some other forbidden artifact, but that would be a bit excessive. Surely the Marquis had already created a good story to justify Flane's condition. Something like, Jack Allantier, the disgrace of the house, learned forbidden magic out of greed. Then your second son, Flan, who discovered this, tried to correct his younger brother. But the boy was too stubborn. Worsening a situation, Jack used forbidden magic on his brother to silence him. Even while suffering, the Heir had an ability to forbid his stupid younger brother. That scenario was probably already playing in the minds of the Marquis and the Marquesa. Just thinking about it was disgusting. For the MC, it was fine to stay there a few days, but he couldn't waste his precious vacation in a place as mediocre as that prison. It's not like yet any love for his house. He could run away now, but he wouldn't do it yet for 3 reasons. His sister, Wrong, and most importantly, his master, Oh. And of course, since he had returned to his original body, the MC was just a 14-year-old boy without muscles and too hit to survive on his own. Hero than Force, he near was survivable in that world. The strong devour the weak. The strongest survive, the weak become food or fertilizer. Jack didn't intend to cause a bloody massacre like in his past life, but he still needed to take revenge on many people. To do that, he would need 2 things, time and power. And the Academy would solve both in a snap. He could gain more time to regain his former strength, increasing powers that were already significant due to his past life experience. By achieving this, he would be able to protect his loved ones, Ron, his sister, and his master. To reach that, Yavatik was rightfully his. Even if he didn't like it. Slowly, mana began to form his hands. A mana user can be divided into 10 ranks. From the 1st to the 3rd circle were beginners, from the 4th to the 6th, specialists, and from the 7th to the 9 high circle mana users, and the rarest ones, those in the 10th circle, were called masters or superhumans. Pressing his palms to his chest, Jack formed a blue glow. It was a good thing no one was there to witness what he was doing. It took only 2 hours to create the first circle, which made him celebrated being in. In his past life, he had started studying mana at 17 years old, maybe due to the impatience teenagers add with everything. He raised his hand, letting it hover above him, amazed by his creation. But he quickly waved it away, remembering that no one could know what he was doing there. A strange sound came from the hallway, similar to the click of the Marquis's shoes. The boy wrapped himself in the blanket and pretended to be asleep, but soon realized the sound wasn't as heavy as usual. The voice he heard belonged to someone who, his past life, here only soon very old mongers, and made him sound quickly. On the other side of the bars, his cheerful sister, Elizabeth Valentier, waited for the boy. She reached her hands through the bars and asked anxiously if the boy was very hurt. Tears streamed from his eyes upon seeing that his beloved sister was still beautiful and kind-hearted and had come to visit him under those circumstances. What she called him Jackie was like music to his ears, a nickname he hadn't heard in years. He pressed her hand to his face and smiled as he told her he wasn't hurt and everything was fine. Worried, Elizabeth asked why the boy had his forbidden magic, since she had offered to teach him magic whenever he wanted. Their hands intertwined as he apologized, but his sister changed the topic, asking why the MC had returned home early. Receiving silence for her younger brother bothered her. as he froze up. So she asked if everything was really okay and if the boy could hear what she was saying. But all he did was wipe away the tears and smile, explaining that he was happy. His action left Elizabeth confused. How could he be happy in a situation like that, in a cold, filthy cage completely alone? And Jap revealed that he was very happy that this was real after dreaming so much of seeing his sister again. His words made the girl assured Ward had gone completely mad, but he grew serious again her attention. Then he made the suggestion he had always wanted to, should be run away, which surprised the girl. Still, he continued, suggesting they go to a nomad forest where they could start their own farm while cultivating together. Dryly, the woman scolds him. However, Jack insists. He knew how Phelan and the Marcoon treated her. It's better to leave everything behind and live in peace. They might even find someone who truly loves her. When he returns to talking about starting a farm and speaking ill of a lord, he's interrupted by a shout from Elizabeth. She cuts him off at the scream, asking him not to say those things about their father, as that would still be his title no matter what happens. To the young woman, the two of them were born from the old man's deep love for her mother, so they couldn't speak about him like that. She knew Jack despised him deeply, but she was willing to change the Lord's opinion of her little brother, so she asked him to hang in there a bit longer. All Jack says is that he was truly happy to see his sister after so long, making her bless. He stands and asks her to step away from the bars, which she does, even though confused. When she obeys, the boy gathers men in his hand, leaving the young woman stunned and bombarding him with questions about his hidden powers. Jack manages to break the lock and opens the cell gate, stepping out to hug his sister tightly. Tearful, he offers his sincere apology, saying he was truly sorry for everything. She grabs his shoulders, worried. That behavior was very strange, and it made her question whether the little one's really feeling well. Our boy smiles, confirming that he was learned just fine. As they embraced, he states that everything would be different this time, and she wouldn't have to sacrifice herself because he would work so Elizabeth could do whatever she wanted. But the noble remembers that soon he would meet the fourth prince. In his past life, that prince took his sister. At the time, she didn't know what awaited her. It was that bastard who turned Jack into a true monster, and flashes of the tortures who was forced to carry out resurface in his mind. He remembered how he captured the monarch, chaining him to a torture table. The rage burned his face, and he was sure he would remember forgive the Talcan Empire for what they did to his sister. In his past life, Jack ran away from home at 17. 10 years later, many things had changed. The Teslan kingdom had vanished and his home and also been destroyed. Tolkien had become the greatest empire, ruling over the entire western continent, and House Volunteers survive only briefly. Memories of his sister, who had still Laia King to mind. At the time, she was the wife of the fourth imperial prince of Tolkien, and she begged for mercy from her family. But she was not a legitimate wife, and the idiot shut her out of hearing her plea, telling her not to bite her but that's here to fan. Even so, Elizabeth never lost her kind heart. She remained on her knees around the palace, begging him for 3 days and 3 nights, until he generously decided to grant a request. At least that was the first version of the story, which spread across the continent from north to south. But the truth behind this generosity was horrifying. Elizabeth constantly expressed her gratitude, for she didn't really know how to thank him properly. However, the prince pinned her against the wall, suggesting she was misunderstanding the situation, and told her not to mess with him, as he could destroy her house whenever he wanted, and the only reason he hadn't was because the time wasn't right yet. In return, she could act exactly how he wanted. The prince controlled her like a puppet. He turned her into a toy for his twisted desires, like a servant. For some torturous reason, the legitimate wives of the idiot gnawed with envy at the situation, until they got tired of her, throwing her into an annex room in the house, left alone and scared by the legitimate women. At that same time, the house of Marquis and Ballantyre was destroyed, so when Jack finally returned, he only found ashes where his home once stood. After hearing the full story, he became a true monster. He had destroyed the Tolkien Empire and everyone even slightly connected to it. First, he annihilated the Empress and the Princess, the wives of the Princess, until he destroyed all the families that supported them. He didn't stop until no one was left. He wouldn't risk leaving even the smallest trace of them alive in that world. Now back in the present, Jack looks at Elizabeth in the cell, certain that he wouldn't let that happen again. But the girl had no idea about any of this, only worried about her little brother, asking him to take care while she spoke with her father. To which he responds with a nod, assuring her he would take care. This time he would do whatever was necessary. She leaves, but her thoughts are troubled. Her little brother had changed a lot, usually even do anything wrong and avoided others. Now there was a confidence in him she had never seen before, a new opportunity. And the magic he used was impressive. Even as a sixth circle user, she couldn't sense any traces of dark magic. However, her father possessed the seventh circle, which indicated that something was very wrong for him not to notice his son's power. Elizabeth enters her father's chambers, finding him drinking tea, and asks him to release Jack, as he had not learned forbidden magic. She thought that kind of magic was just a legend, so there was no way a little boy who knew nothing could access it. His imprisonment must have been a facade to avoid revealing it to the public. She argues that Jack had no interest in the Heir title, and her words prevailed the Lord. And the Gurkha stating that it wasn't just a punishment for her prover, the warrant herself. Her words catching off guard, he didn't expect his daughter to be so clever. The life of a mere tool to ease the lives of the Marquises trapped the girl in a fate she knew well. Indeed, it was a warning for her. A warning in what would happen to Jack if she did something foolish or rejected her own destiny. The Lord states that Jack has no place in that family, so when he comes of age, he will announce his death and send him away under a different identity. Elizabeth freezes she had seemed encouraged by her father's kindness. However, he makes a point that forget her own dirty and curvin. Asim girls for the Heir. She understands, staring at the old man's cruel watchdog. The Lord comments that he couldn't understand how the boy, with no circle, managed to defeat the second son, who was of the third circle, leaving the girl nervous. What did he mean, no circle? In that case, what actually seen earlier in the prison. But the matter is closed by the man, who states that he will release the boy as she asked. With that settled, she asked for permission to leave and thanks him for the favor. Upon closing the door, she breaks down. She remembered Jack's invitation to remember together. 9 was impossible. Her legs no longer support her, so the girl collapses to the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. The morning sun illuminates Jack's face. The night was full of dreams about events from his past life. Maybe it was because of the new room he slept in. However, he can't reflect much as he sees a guard opening his cell to announce that he was being released. Jack stands up, sarcastically commenting that he was starting to like the new room. The guard holds his clothes, prompting the boy to thank him for the kindness. However, when refusing to return his shoes, is starting claims how when we refuse a van for him. The attitude makes the emissary lose his patience, yelling at the guard, asking if he thought there were friends or something. He hesitates, trying to make amends, but it's too late as Jack already concentrated a large amount of mana in his fist. Then the child attacks mercilessly. It teaches servant a lesson. Sometime later, the boy gets dressed to return to the palace, and he's received by Ron, always cheerful, who runs toward him as soon as he sees him in the garden. His eyes are full of genuine concern as he inspects the young master for injuries. Noticing the ink stains on his clothes, he becomes even more worried, but the boy tells him to relax as it wasn't his blood. However, his gaze soon shifts to the guards patrolling the party in greater numbers than usual, and the brother explains that 10-foot soldiers and a squire from the Order of the Iron Blood Knights were assigned to the Marquises. Among them, one Iron Blood squire stands out, his gleaming armor contrasting with his grim expression. Poor guy, mutters Jack, analyzing the warrior. A mighty such potential reduced to a spoiled noble's babysitter. He certainly didn't imagine that when deciding to become a knight. Noticing his tense stare, the MC concludes that the blonde man probably already knew it happened for him to be in prison earlier. The Mite Dan proposes making a respectful bow to the All-Master, and wastes no time asking if he could share what happened in the prison, if it wasn't too much. This makes Jack's jaw drop. The guy was much more polite than he expected. The blonde man adds, explaining that he had just read a report stating the boy had ripped off at guard's fingers and right eye. Ron, outraged, intervenes immediately, insisting that there was no way the third young master could do something like that. However, the knight insists, stating that even so, he had the right to know why he attacked his colleague. Jack didn't want to be dry lack cursing happens at Fags' squire. Right? He repeats as if the word were an insult to his person. His eyes scan the knight, evaluating every detail to estimate what circle he was in, probably the 4th. So he confesses that he expected a dog of the mantis to know its place. The blonde man retorts, complaining that his words were too harsh. But the boy doesn't understand what's so harsh about calling someone a dog, and Ron scolds him. Already irritated, Jack explains that the only function had there was to stay nearby and keep watch over him. He could do all sorts of things and even clean by himself, using all the time he needed, but he shouldn't talk to the MC about rights. And since he knew if he wanted to become a knight, he suggests that he stay in his place and pray not to cause any trouble. The knight lowers his head in submission, asking the boy for forgiveness. The bow brings a smile to the boy's face, who celebrates his new well-trained dog. Satisfied, he turns his back, ending the conversation and telling the squire to report what he concludes after resolving all that mess. And if he had any complaints, he should speak directly with the Marquis. Additionally, he adds that his new nickname would be Chick, and you should come running when Jack called him that. Finally, he and Ron head back into the palace, leaving the Chick there in complete silence. Hearing a growl in his stomach, protagonist tells the butler he really wanted to eat some meat if possible. Therefore, the servant affirms that he will fulfill his wishes immediately. An incredible meal is prepared just for the boy, Phil in the MC's belly, making him praise Ron's talent in the kitchen. Noticing the tension on the man's face, Jack asks him to say what he wants to say and starts staring in like that. But Ron still hesitates. The boy offers some meat to the blonde man, suggesting they eat together innocently. However, the butler can accept, questioning how you would dare share a meal with the young master, which tells him to sit down already and stop at the speech because there was something they needed to discuss. So the man meals, sitting at the table with the young master, strikes to the point the MC asks about his sister's condition. to which the servant responds by saying Elizabeth with the same as always. His eyes shine like those of a defenseless child, even though his words are sharp as same as Sharon was of an event, and that, of all the people there, he should know very well how much his sister was suffering, making the man tremble. Still, he continued the narrative that he wasn't aware of anything being interrupted by the boy. He repeats the compliments about the taste of the food, recalling that he could eat without worries during childhood thanks to the butler, who always checked if there was poison in any of the ingredients. The fact that he knew this is surprising to the butler, but the MC wasn't done yet. Another good reason was that the man was a men's circle mage. Once again, he is caught off guard by the things the protagonist knew. Then the boy continues, as someone who stayed by my mother's side, you must know, but I don't know what my biological mother was like since she died when I was born. However, seeing how everyone commented on the similarities between her and Elizabeth, Jack concludes that she must have been a very good person. That's what he truly believed. The boy confirms that Ron protected his mother from the shadows and her escort was an immense circle mage. If this were a novel, the boy would have thrown the book away due to the lack of realism, but this was reality. He remembers when he ran away from home in his past life, accompanied by the butler while being pursued by people sent by his father. The rain that night was intense, making everything even more tense. Those pursuers were probably members of the Iron Blood Knights Order, just like the chick from earlier. The Marquis had sent them to eliminate his own son. At the time, the captain was a menth surplus swordsman, and Ron sacrificed himself to protect the protagonist, emanating an absurd amount of mana against the pursuer. Jack explains that when that happened, he feared the man after learning that he was the naked circle mage who had accompanied his mother. But he knew the woman wasn't exactly a commoner, something the Marquis didn't know, perhaps not even the butler knew. In that case, the boy concludes that he'll continue living without knowing, since the kind of person the servant was in the present was all that mattered. After that whole spiel, the man asked what the young master wanted from him, and he explains that he only trusted him and his sister, so if he wanted him to protect her. His request is strange since Elizabeth had reached the 6th circle at only 18 years old, which meant she was very capable of protecting herself. However, Jack counters saying that she was very kind and the type of person who didn't mind making many sacrifices. But a life of sacrifice wasn't ideal for the girl, it was ideal for the Marquis. He informed that you will go to the academy early the next day and more return unless something very serious happens. He would stay at the institution for 4 years and needed someone to stay with his sister day in that town. After that, Ron could do whatever he wanted with his life. Downcast, the man asks what he meant by his life. Jack explains that he wasn't referring to the life he led hiding behind him, but to discovering what he truly wanted to do. However, the servant becomes curious about why he would spend exactly 4 years at the academy, and the boy says that only after that would he be able to protect Elizabeth by himself. When asked from whom he would need to protect the girl, the MC is interrupted by a third person entering the room. Even in such an important moment, he couldn't simply send a person away. There was a chick announcing he would deliver an report. The guard had already received first aid and was being sent for treatment. Hearing that, he pretends to care, which only encourages the blonde man to whine more, saying that Guy had accidentally cut his fingers while training and then dropped the dagger, which pierced his eye. At the end, the MC congratulates him on the good work, asking if the Marquis little dog wanted a bone, which the man refuses. He calls him Chick, being corrected by James Canta, who finally says his name, but the boy didn't care at all, and says he wanted to learn fencing, say he named a real sword and won one. However, the square refuses of all the pride of a knight, stating he wasn't a messenger boy. Jack calls him Chick again before asking if he didn't like him. Smiling, explains that this was the perfect chance to beat him up. His words make Ron jump from his seat. Watching him asks if he was serious, receiving a yes as an answer. The rascal even shows his teenage hands, arguing that they had never held a sword before, so the man could hit him as much as he wanted in a duel. To make sure he heard right, the squire asks if the boy wanted him to be his fencing teacher. But Jack bursts out laughing, commenting that this was the third funniest thing he never heard, and tells him to fetch the swords already. When James leaves, the butler asks if the boy would be okay fighting an opponent of the 4th circle, but that doesn't seem to bother the MC. He was worried he might get hurt, but his confidence was so great that he proposed a bet. Ron considers the possibility carefully, and suggests betting on how many hits Jack would take instead of betting on who would win or lose, which seems like a good idea to the young man, who asks what they would wager. Even though he showed confidence, Ron says to a man whom the squire was in competitive relief, making sure he would really go through with it. He didn't trust his skills one bit. In that case, the MC suggests the butler would win the bet if he took even one hit from the chick. His offer surprises him. What do you mean, just one hit? Moreover, the boy wanted the loser to fulfill a wish of the winner. This makes the blonde man a little sad for a moment, stating that if the boy wanted something from him, all he needed to do was give the order. After all, he was the mansion's servant, but hearing that only made Jack more eager, half-drawn at the poor guy's expense. The boy speaks up, pointing at the man and reaffirming that he only trusted him and his sister, but all Ron says is that it's rude to point the fork. However, his gaze betrayed how much he was enjoying the situation, complaining while he was jumping for joy inside, and the MC comments on that. Putting on his most innocent face, the boy explains that he didn't give orders to people he trusted, he only asked favors. And that's what he wanted from the butler. The servant's eyes shine, saying that if he asked like that, it would be harder to refuse anything he wanted. Their conversations interrupted by James, who returns to their roommate and he is to apologize for his earlier rudeness, and asked the protagonist to reconsider what he said. There were countless people like the chick who disrespected Jack even in his presence. But an indirect humiliation like that and laying hands on him were very different things, which made him conclude that the guard was afraid of what could happen. That's why he was kneeling and saying all that. The boy asks if he wanted to go somewhere the two of them wouldn't be watched, confusing him. With an air of superiority, he suggests that the squire was afraid of losing to a teenager. He's expressing his opinion of hearing that, and he turns his head in denial. But the boy insists, "So you're sure you're going to beat me up, huh?" He says while observing the blonde's attentive face, which said it all. Of course he was sure. Even in his silence, Jack asked Wrong if he knew a place where they could train alone, shocking the servant. He couldn't lie to his master, so he reveals the perfect place for that. It was a hidden basement at the back of the mansion. The place was filled with neatly organized weapons and training equipment. Upon arriving, Jack asks at the buller train in that space, which he denies, explaining that his mother had prepared to run for her 2 cents. This makes the young man ask why he didn't know about it in that case, and the servant says it was because he didn't train, which made sense. Thinking about it, even if it hadn't been used before, everything was shining. Someone probably cleaned the place regularly. Smiling at the butler, Jack thanks him for taking care of the room, and the man also seems pleased with his own work. Finally, his attention turns to the chick, who trembles at being called, and extends his hand to ask for the wooden sword. Even though the blonde was hesitant, the boy crushed her down and stopping. Though the hand of the woodman carefully, his voice still comes out trembling. His gaze turns to the squire, who comments that the protagonist seemed a bit experienced in holding a sword. The comment makes him smile wickedly. If he stacked all the living beings he destroyed in his past life, he could reach the heavens. He thanks him for the compliment and tells the knight to take the fight seriously, even if the swords are wooden. The two begin the fight, and Jack Kent and his opponent, who easily blocks and dodges the blows, feeling confident. However, with precise movements, the MC places the tip of his woven sword and ends the knight's throat. The man freezes, not understanding how he was defeated so easily. Ron shouts to get the young master's attention, who is too focused, warning a chick that if that had been a real weapon, he'd be dead. He won't even take the fight seriously, which clearly hadn't happened. The blind says nothing, shocked by the boy's skill in fencing, questioning whether that was really his first time holding a sword. Even Ron was scared by what he had just seen. Just seconds ago, the young master lunged, and the knight had easily struck into the sag. Even when was a knight had a son 14 years old, shouldn't the meek. According to his expectations, the boy should have ended up on the ground, defeated and disarmed. But instead, the brat moved with perfect form, perfect attacks and dodges. If it had been a real blade, James wouldn't have stood a chance. He didn't know what had happened to Jack. Beyond fencing, he had never held a sword before. Could he be some kind of sword genius or something? No. Even a genius wouldn't be that skilled. While lost in thought, the teenager confirms that the squire was in his 20s, and he replies that he was 23, prompting the MC to ask when he's 20 was Manhwa. It was at 18. The news makes him smile like a maniac, faking excitement as he asked if the blonde reached the 4th circle in 5 years. That was quite talented, considering how late it started. Observing his internal manner, he concludes that the squire could easily reach the 8th circle, which would open many doors for his position in the guard. Without saying another word, the boy drops the wooden sword to the ground and asks James questions. He grabs a real blade this time, thinking how funny it was to waste such talent on the neo babysitter. He says he was starting to like the guy. Seeing the blade in his hand, the adult warns him he could get hurt, something Jack strongly disagreed with. This makes him burst out laughing, until he takes on a serious posture like a second path, and explains that there's a clear difference between arrogance and confidence, asking if he believed what had just happened was just a lucky coincidence. The blonde is left speechless, even as he feels his blood boil. "That's why you're just a chick. This time you come to me," Jack says, calling the man to the second round. By this point, the man is already grounding his teeth in anger, doesn't have to take the chant. His reaction only made it clear how weak he was to fall for such a provocation. Once again, James loses his sword and his chin meets the tip of the young master's blade, who smiles sweetly, saying that apparently it was his second loss of the day. He couldn't understand how the bread did that, angrily demanding an explanation. But he just plays dumb, explaining that he had merely changed the direction of the sword at the moment their blades crossed. Still, the man insists on knowing exactly how he did that. Showing off, Jack claims it was an advanced technique and asks if the wine said again. Despite feeling less and less confident, the knight grabs a real sword so they can battle again. Meanwhile, the protagonist confirms with Wrong that he had won the bet, and he nods, asking the master to tell him what he must do. Our boy explains that his request was the same as earlier, protect Elizabeth, and he wanted to be sure the servant could actually do it. The man freezes but confirms that he would risk his own life to make it happen. Back to the chick, the man says this time would be different. Making Jack prepare with the sword while channeling mana, says the opponent had mana too. Still, the blind says Sigala. On the first strike, James is blocked instantly. The young man's man penetrates his skin, causing intense pain that brings him to the ground. With the man on the floor, Jack makes a point of stepping on his chest to observe his frightened face. Even without much strength left, he asks how First Circle like the MC could have so much power. It was a reasonable confusion since a mere First Circle had defeated him, but the explanation was simple. Instead of the usual means of evenly distributing mana for the body to enhance general physical abilities, our boy focused on Mon-Ranging. Ignoring the question, Jack asked if the squire really wanted to become an official knight, but the man doesn't understand. Wasn't he already official? Trying to understand, the man asks what exactly the boy meant. Then Jack makes an unexpected proposal. He wanted the blonde to become a loyal hunting dog. To James, it seems offended by the offer. But the MC insists, stating that if he became a dog that only followed his orders, he'd have a much better life than as an official knight. The knight hesitates, clearly torn to train Didi a curiosity. So he asks that he would gain if he accepted the position, disappointing Jack, who grumbled that he wasn't even interested in knowing what he'd have to do. Trying to overlook the blonde's awful personality, MC assures him he'd have power and authority if that's what he wanted. Now regarding his duties, it was all very simple. He just had to eliminate anyone who stood in his master's way and cause harm. The boy's cold explanation leaves both James and Rong in shock, and the first thing the knight asks is who he would have to annihilate. Jack says the target was obvious, referring to Phelan, who was still betrayed. However, he gave him a day to think about proposal. After the training, the young man was in his room with Rong, and the servant couldn't help but ask if he wasn't being a bit reckless in trusting James. But he disagreed, prompting the man to warn that what was said earlier can reach the Marquiness's ears. The boy laughs, only be quickly scolded, since the Marquiness seemed to be just going for a chance. As she found out that Jack was leaving the next day for the academy, she wouldn't let it happen and might try to get rid of him. Even of all that, the MC is unconcerned. He knew that she might even want to hurt him, but she wouldn't. Since the incident with Phelan, his older brother had been afraid of water. The woman was waiting for her chance, but she was too busy. Can't keep his eyes open for her, and the Lord conditioning Elizabeth into submission. In such a delicate situation, it was impossible for her to finish him off. Ron seems conflicted, as he keeps insisting on knowing when the boy was her Ashura that. Jack replies by asking if he really thought the Marquis would let the woman do such a thing. He couldn't go anywhere other than the academy, so how can she possibly destroy him? She'd probably stop after causing a fracture or two. Besides, a mere Marcoons wouldn't be capable of such a feat. So many superior creatures had tried before, and even they failed. It was almost funny how out of touch it was. With the matter closed, Jack thanks the servant for the massage, and Rong, tired arguing, simply says, "You're welcome." The little one gets his attention and says, "Is there kami one getsu?" Wearing the servant now asks if he was planning to swipe up to leave. He laughs, saying that in a way, yes. But Ron doesn't find it funny at all. Jack tells him to follow him secretly if he's really curious about what will happen the next day, which catches the servant by surprise. He thought he would accompany the young master, but there was no chance of that happening. So much so that he makes the butler promise not to be seen. Before leaving the room, Jack informs him that he will be forming the second circle in his room, so no one can interrupt him. Ron is confused. Second circle? In if that wasn't supposed to be something Cronton used. But for our boy, was quite simple. Even unconvinced, the servant just says he'll do as requested. Wandering the castle, James couldn't get the fight with a brat out of his head. With those skills, he had to be a third circle. He might even be a genius, but his proposal to turn him into a guard dog was absurd. It's not like he had the mantis backing like his brother, and he didn't have any vassals supporting him. No, the third gun master has nothing. Remembering the boy's words about having a much better life didn't help at all. James admits he have been too easily swayed out of words about childing and nothing. You should tell the Marquiness everything, from Jack's martial talent to what they discussed in the basement. Among the mansion's maids, the blonde smiles, thinking this would be the perfect opportunity to stand out to the Marquises. No matter how much of a genius the brat was, he wouldn't beat the Marcus house unless he were a monster. Meanwhile, in Elizabeth's room, the girl hears that her mother, just some commoner, gave her a one-time opportunity. The Marquiness claims there's nothing remarkable about being talented. Because there's his daughter, nothing remarkable as interesting reclaims her saints. She remains silent, clearly hurt by the woman's harsh words. Offering a glass of wine, the wound comments that the girl was such a sweetheart, asking her not to be shy about accepting the drink. Elizabeth immediately refuses, explaining that she can't drink in front of the Marquiness. Shrugging, the witch downs her glass in one gulp and keeps talking, saying the son of Duke Malone in an A-symbol seemed interested in her. But she quickly interrupts herself and corrects. The middle son definitely wouldn't be good for her. The Marquiness states that she'll find a much better match, and in the meantime, the girl should take very good care of herself and behave. Suddenly, she asks if Elizabeth is interested in someone, something the girl quickly denies. That makes the lady smile a satisfaction, explaining that if there was someone, he would have to disappear without a trace. Then she starts rambling about her younger brother because it seemed like he was thinking of something quite interesting. The mention of Jack unsettles the girl, who doesn't understand what her stepmother is taunting about. She knows about Jack's conversation with a knight and says that her brother Chadver kurt the knight to stat. But she didn't expect James had been supported by her second son for a long time. Elizabeth shrinks in her chair upon hearing those words. While the woman laughs like a lunatic, to think he tried to eliminate me with someone like that. His stupid idea is so hilarious. Suddenly, the Marchioness lets out an evil laugh. The young girl's expression wilts and she blames the parents for Jack having these thoughts. But she knew she had to hold herself back or their hatred for the boy would only worsen. After laughing until her belly hurt, the wound calms down and turns to Elizabeth, and ends the subject by reaffirming that she'll continue searching for good marriage partners for her. However, there was something she still needed to say, even if it was just out of concern. Wrapping her arms around the girl's neck, she threatens her. If you start getting involved with someone in secret, you know very well how that will end. The girl trembles with fear. All she can do in response is whisper that she understands. Her submission delights the hag, who praises her before Leon, reminding her she's raising for dinner. Downcast, Elizabeth simply agrees with her second mother. As night falls, the maids begin preparations for dinner. In a few moments, the members of the Volunteer family gathered at the table to enjoy the meal. However, the dining room door opens abruptly, startling everyone. It's Jack entering the room uninvited and bold enough to ask why everyone looked like they were at a funeral. All eyes turn to him. His sister is in shock and everyone else is filled with pure disdain, especially his father. With fake innocence, the boy argues that, as the precious third young master of the family, there should be a free chair for him to sit in. A family's earlier had be a free custom training to man manipulation. There were two types of manner circulation, when that affected physical abilities. In other words, it enhanced intelligence, senses, and especially strength. The second way was injecting mana into a systematic formula and materializing it. Things like fireballs, ice arrows, and hellfire were good examples of this method. Rom was a men's circle mage, while James was a fourth circle swordsman, and depending on how you use your mana, you could be either a mage or a swordsman. Jack was a swordsman, but that didn't mean he couldn't use magic. In fact, their hue as emanating mana was sitting on the bed. Butler looked at him in astonishment, but he soon informed the boy that it had taken him 2 months to master the second circle. There was something impressive, considering it usually takes several months for a first circle guy to reach the second. Unless you were a regressor like him, it was a very difficult feat to achieve in 2 months. Smiling, he complimented the servant, saying he was incredible. This made Rong laugh, saying he didn't think he should be hearing up from someone who became a second circle mana user in just hours. Speaking of time, the boy asked what time he was, and a certain planet was 5:48, and he asked her name. He jumped up, surprised by how much time had passed. Since it was dinner time, he wondered if he should cook a steak like always, but quickly discarded the idea, because his arrogant family was probably in the main dining hall stuffing their faces. So he decided he would dine like a noble, which Rong thought was madness. But the boy lied, using the excuse that he was going to tell them he would be leaving the next day. Back in the room, Jack was already devouring a chicken leg, drilling over the delicious food of the main house. The scoundrel even commented that it was tasty, but Mao's good at the Ryan's cooking. Elect the relatives furtis. After stuffing himself, he thanked them for the meal. But his father called his attention to ask if he had come there to say something, and he confirmed, as he had no other reason to go to that shitty place. The insolent way he spoke made the Lord think his son had gone mad. Even so, the protagonist kept provoking, asking why his father was making that weird face. The tension between the two was obvious. And Elizabeth asked Jack to talk with her outside the room, saying she'd provide whatever her brother wanted, but the Marcus interrupted her. Whatever him saying, he asked the Clid to just say what he had to say. So he announced he would leave for the academy the next day because he couldn't stand that gloomy atmosphere. Even soaking, the Marquis approved the boy's decision, but Jack wasn't asking for any permission to leave. To avoid an argument, Jack admitted he was happy with his father's approval. With that out of the way, the MC felt comfortable enough to ask about his brother, who trembled when addressed. Holding his wine, he commented that he had heard Phelan couldn't even drink due to the water phobia he had developed, must be dying of thirst. That even though he was a brother who used to be him and Doherty, MC still considered him Thanglik. Maliciously, he poured the wine on the dinner table, saying that since it wasn't water, he should take a sip. Phelan freaked out, his brother's gesture nearly falling out of his chair, and the Marchioness couldn't contain her anger, screaming that the boy was insolent and asking how he had the nerve to do such things. But Jack turned his back, stating that he had said what he wanted to say. To him, the woman's voice was like a barking dog. He left the room under a heavy silence, knowing his words would echo through that mansion for a long time. Full of hatred, the Marchioness assured the other family members that she would not let that disrespect slide, and the moon mocked her, saying he'd be waiting for it. That historical screams of the lady could still be heard from the other side of the door, cursing, determined to end that child. In the hallways, the maids whispered among themselves, trying to make sense of what they had just witnessed, but they tried to focus on cleaning the wine-stained tablecloth. Unlike the Marchioness's words, nothing unusual happened that night except for being scolded by Elizabeth. On the morning of his departure, Jack wondered how the preparations for being vent could be so simple. Even with a luxurious exterior, there was nothing there except a comfortable place to sit. The march was commanded by a sixth circle jerk knight and Razan, who stared at the MC in a suspicious way as if he had some secret plan or something like that. Besides him, James was also included in the Uber package to the academy. Worried about her brother, Elizabeth checked if he didn't want company for the trip, but he dismissed her. The girl was very worried, since their second mother seemed to be plotting something, so she insisted on accompanying him. Since their burrow was very stumping, he asked her not to worry, and he stated that many things would change from that day on, and that he really was fine. Besides, now he knew that there was no way the family could destroy her. Downcast, the girl kept following him on horseback, which made the boy suggest she go back and asked how long she planned to keep following him. Finally, the girl gave him, asking him to be careful, and Ron watched her leave with suspicion. The butler was visibly nervous when he asked if the young master was really sure about his decision, since the atmosphere in the main house was horrible. In the Sims vision as Elizabeth and received the same answer she did. Jack took the chance to remind him of the promise he made yesterday, something he was supposed to do that day during the night. There was no way the servant would forget. Along the way, Razan watched the dude's interactions with suspicion. Upon receiving Ron's confirmation, the MC emphasized that he should take care of his sister, dismissing him so she wouldn't be left alone. And so he did, wishing him a good trip. The servant would follow them march from the rear and then see what would happen when that did. He wanted a treat as a gift for the balo. When always work hard in his favor, the cozy atmosphere made the boy young the sleep, so he decided to take a nap during the trip. But upon noticing the boy had dozed off, Rosam looked at him coldly, as if plotting something. The journey continued until nightfall. He remained in deep sleep until noticing the dark sky. Jack got up to ask why no one had woken him earlier. Upon seeing the servants settling in, he concluded that they were going to camp in that spot. James approached the brat, which put him on alert, and the two stared in the camper which encamps him into the broach them out. Looking ahead, he commented that his little chick had really decided to tell everything to the Marcunis. Him is surrounded by guards, so it wasn't like he could do anything about it now, since he'd already been captured. Raisin said there wouldn't be much small talk with the MC, but the brat told him to at least try a little because he would listen attentively. The silver-haired man seemed pleased to reveal that during the 4 days they would spend taking him to the academy, they would camp at night. However, Jack didn't see anything wrong that isolated fact, until a man looked at him with a psychopath gaze and said they would grind his bones into dust every night and give him a healing potion at the end of each one. When the explanation ended, the boy didn't seem surprised or scared and asked him to continue. Razan explained that the Marcunis had ordered something else. The boy created a mana circle and everyone there knew it by now, so the woman ordered him to destroy it, which put a smile on the bastard's face. That indeed caught his attention. Breaking a mana circle was like a death sentence. Even it was possible to recreate a broken circle. The chance of regenerating mana was 1/1,000. As if that weren't enough, you could spend the rest of your life unable to walk due to the shock of having your circle destroyed. The bastard continues, saying he had already heard everything from James. Apparently, Jack didn't just have talent for mana, but with the sword as well. And he added that it might be impressive for other people, but in his case, it wouldn't matter, because the boy wouldn't change anything with just talent. Finally, he asked him not to resist as it would only make things worse. The boy knew that Mr. Yuri won, felt like he returned to his Borndens with Watami Ather's friend, but he was the ghost of the sword even if he had spent his days peacefully in this new life. The scars of his past had been deeply engraved in his heart, so he called the butler, and began telling how he spent 10 years in prison on the mountain, leaving the guards confused. Even so, he continued, saying he had met the master who taught him everything there. But everything changed when he came down. His family and the kingdom had fallen. Not that he gave a damn about his house's future, to be honest. So many meaningful words made the guards ask what he was talking about. So thinking he gave an answer, but said Drew is sobered, stating that he had something on his mind. And that was what happened to his sister, because Elizabeth was smart and talented, so he thought that at least she'd be lucky enough to find a husband, since she had no luck with her family. At the palace, the girl stared at the sky, thinking about her brother and trying to convince herself that he would be okay. If his sister had lived happily with someone she loved, she would have forgiven everything else. The men kept laughing, suggesting he had gone insane from the fear he was feeling, but there was no use resisting in that singering. However, the boy kept purging and sending revenge to his feeler when the guard thought, sweet enough to drive you mad, and he agreed with the guy, saying he couldn't do anything with just simple sword talent, convinced he could maybe endure Rezon's torture once. But generating all the mana around him, he declared that he could do a lot with his overwhelming talent and power. Filled of hatred, Jack said that from that moment on, he would show them exactly that. As fast as a storm, his mana circle expanded, if the captain still asked what he could do with a pathetic little circle like that. However, he was sent to realize that if he do a stilt that tower to however many tower guard would be fetished. With violent winds that destroyed everything in their path, Jack launched a mana blast capable of annihilating an entire city toward the men. James had regretted his decision up until that moment. Anyone would have chosen the second young master over the trash of the Valenti or Marcus family. But in that moment, it was as if time had stopped, and the blonde felt that his life had come to an end. The boy managed to break his sword after the intense fight against all those men. Now he looked at them lying on the ground, completely powerless. He called for Ron to appear, and the servant did, stepping out from the bushes and asking what he had just witnessed. The two of them stared at the destruction the boy had caused in shock. Jack explained that that was one of the first 4 techniques out of a total of 8 sword techniques he had completed in a transcendent region, even if he didn't know what it all meant. Nervously, the servant said he might not know everything about the boy, but the scene looked more like the result of a mana application art than a sword technique. The protagonist faked surprise and changed the sword by asking the man to give him a potion. He had one. However, Ram was startled to see the boy spitting strawberry juice. The boy was spitting rivers of it. It still insisted it was nothing and just asked for the potion again. The brother pulled a flask from his coat, handing it quickly to the boy, who drank it all in one go, all while receiving a scolding from the servant, who warned that if he hadn't had a potion, the protagonist would have gone to food and drinks, meaning died. Even in a situation like that, Jack smiled, saying he had warned that wouldn't happen, because the man was so well prepared for emergencies like that. Besides, he knew Ron would have used the potion on him instead of keeping it for himself. The reason he was so sure of all this was because a similar situation had happened in the past too. He remembered when he was lying in Ron's arms and the butler was the only one there for him. Not conscious, Jack started rambling about how both of them had been too busy running the past to say anything important to the servant. He looked at him with shining eyes and sincerely said, "Thank you very much." He agreed to how hard at him and to say something like that, stating that his past self must have been really stupid. Hearing the boy's confessions, Ron concluded that knowing things about the future was the true secret of the third young master after all, and Jack explained that he had done at time regression, something his companion was very familiar with. Then he got himself ready to get up from the ground. The boy was surprised by his condition, which was much better than before, indicating that the potion he received was high grade. He stood up completely. To retrieve was sore and collect his coat. That was enough. But he took the chance to take one last look, confirming that the little chick was indeed destroyed. Stepping on his head, the MC confessed that he would really like to turn the blonde into a little messenger boy. Ron commented that you could say he had made a wise decision, but Jack disagrees, saying he hadn't had much hope in the guy from the start anyway. And he brought back the subject of time regression, asking if the butler wasn't curious about anything. He even tried to think of something that might make him curious, but nothing came to mind. The protagonist came to think was about what happened to his sister or to the Marcus family, but Ron had already imagined their fate, even if it was surprising. And just by seeing the teenager's reaction, he knew the process hadn't been pretty. Jack confessed that he could tell him but would only do so if he showed a lot of curiosity. He teased him by asking what he thought, if he was curious, but the servant explained that wasn't exactly the case. That left the boy a bit annoyed, shouting for a man to stop being so dull. When asked about his own fate, Ron admitted he had his doubts, but supposed he would have survived either way. Awkwardly, the servant said he didn't think he was someone who would die prematurely. Was surprised by the protagonist, who made it very clear that had been exactly how he meant his end. That indeed was a surprise and left the men curious, but Jack asked him not to be disheartened by something like that. Ending the conversation, he entered the carriage, announcing that he was going to get a little rest. Lying down on the bench, the boy tried to relax while Ron approached one of the guards. Realizing he was still alive, he placed a hand on his head to knock him out for good. He analyzed whether it was really appropriate to call a weapon used in an attempt that wiped out 25 high-level wise to sword. All the men had their hearts pierced, but it didn't seem like they had been stabbed with a blade, so he couldn't understand the source of the damage. The servant looked back at all the bodies on the ground and wondered what kind of life the boy had lived in the past, worried whether everything would really be fine in the end. After some time, Jack woke up startled and drenched in sweat, hearing Ron calling out to him. Ron asked if he was really okay, even though he had taken the potion. Realizing who it was, he opened up, explaining that he wasn't okay. He still felt a lot of pain, and the brother of the Stin handed a bag to the boy, informing him that he had searched the mite's belongings and collected 5 high-grade potions, 63 gold coins, and 40 common coins. This surprised the teenager, who commented that even a mantis dogs carried of certain amounts of money. Noticing that he closed the bag, the servant asked that he wasn't going to drink the potions, but Jack explained it would be useless to drink one at that moment, and handing 3 more flasks to the servant, he said that was payment for the potion he had given him. Gladly accepting, it was as if his 1 high-grade potion had been transformed into 3 with a gesture. He asked what the boy would do with the bodies there, but Jack didn't plan to do anything. He would just leave them to be eaten or found by someone, which led the blonde to warn that people would become suspicious of Jack if he were the only one not among them. That surprised him, and he asked who would be suspicious, but it was obvious he was referring to the Marcus. Only the protagonist already knew that even if his father suspected him, he couldn't harm him. Meanwhile, Wrong are you that if he were in the Lord's place, he were wrong seven him immediately, the codify thems. Smiling, the boy asked if he wanted to bet on it, but the man declined as he already knew he'd lose again after all. His master was too clever. Looking at the boy, the blonde knelt down, saying that despite all that, he believed there was something Jack truly believed in, deep in his heart. Jack confirmed that no one else knew the man was there. which was true. To be completely sure of it, the mage explained that he had left behind an illusion at the palace, so was probably still tidying up the NX at that moment. The illusion was a nice circle spell that could be considered a clone, and those powerful enough to see through that kind of magic were currently unconscious. Changing the focus, the MC explained that the Marcus might wonder what happened there today, so he asked that if the situation got ugly, Ron should tell him that it was Jack who did it. In the worst case scenario, if the Marcus seemed ready to tear him apart, he should say the following: "If you or my sister die, that will be the beginning of the destruction of the Marcus house." The two stayed silent for a brief moment. Ron admitted if he was getting nervous for an arbriefing, and the bully burst into laughter, stating it was just a hypothetical situation. He didn't need to make such a serious face. For now, he could only hope a Marquis would act like a father to Elizabeth, as if giving her one last chance. Then the man asked if they really should go to the academy, and the boy confirmed, only to be bombarded with questions about his father's position on the matter. However, he couldn't seem worried because even at the academy there were rules. Once the semester began there, unless the head of the house or someone directly related to him died, returning to the mansion was impossible. In that case, it was time for the servant to take his leave. From the look on the brother's face, it was clear he wished he could accompany the brat on his adventure, which on one hand would be fun, but it still wasn't the right time. Thinking about that, the boy asked him to be careful of the monsters on his way back. Then the bon asked if he would really only see him again in 4 years, something Jack also wondered about but didn't know for sure. However, regardless of that, he reaffirmed that the man should take care of his sister as he had promised. Now that he was without Ron, he needed to devise a new strategy. Considering they had the camp on the mountain 3 times from the Marquis's house to the academy, it would take 4 days by road but also 4 more days hiking a trail. However, observing the path, he realized that the trail in question wasn't much different from the road. So he grabbed a suitcase. Certainly was a sign that there was a village nearby. The protagonist mounted one of the horses, or at least tried to. Having a dismount bounty was a terrible thing, and it took him a long time to finally go on the animal. They continued the journey in silence on a night so peaceful that you wouldn't believe a violent battle had taken place just minutes earlier. Jack didn't plan to go directly to the academy. No. Now his priority was his master, Valentine Milos. She was the one who allowed him to keep living, granting him enough power to get his revenge and turning him into a decent person, despite having been forgotten. She was the one who reached the peak of forbidden magic, a summary of fear for those remembering who. As he broke, he wondered how long it had been since his heart beat so hard for something. Arvelo, territory of Baron Arbelo, a vassal house symbol. Arriving in the city, the protagonist spotted an inn, wondering if he should spend the night there. In front of the establishment, 3 children were chatting cheerfully. Judging by their faces, it must have been a great place to live. Upon entering the inn, the boy found various types of people sharing a meal, along with a very cute dog. Petting the little animal, he sat at a table, hoping that Nilongo of Pekafate would hang. As soon as he sat down, a Salon greeted him, commenting that it was the first time they had seen such a young customer alone there. It was a girl full of love to give, who asked if he wanted something to eat or a room to stay in. She didn't seem like an employee based on her clothes. In fact, she looked more like a mercenary than anything else. With the boy hand over 3 coins, asking for a light meal, a drink, and a room, and requested that she take the sword yet left nearest course up to the room. However, the woman took only 1 coin, saying it was enough, and informed him that she would bring havopines and meat too, since he was in his growing phase. With a kind expression, she asked that the child wanted to drink a bit of milk or maybe a beer, but embarrassed, Jack said milk would be fine. She turned around, asking him to play with Arnold the dog while he waited. It seemed like a good place to live, and the woman hadn't tried to cheek him, probably because the war hadn't started yet. The dog was very friendly, and Jack told him he didn't know what was waiting for him in the future. He said just thinking about the possibility of living carefreely, unaware of anything, until something called his attention from in Casa among friends of one of the nearby tables. They were talking about how someone planned to eradicate demonic monsters with the help of countless manning users for this large-scale plan. One of them didn't understand why they would do something so unnecessary, saying even the Tolkien Empire was lowering itself over so little. The boy listened tensely as the blonde man expressed his dissatisfaction. The Marcus's elite superforce, the Iron Blood Knight Order, had been sent to the Demon Beast Forest for a subjugation mission, by order of the King of Teslin, who gathered Prada sorters for every house in Marsnibers and decided to send them to subjugate the forest along with some mercenaries. The massive forest had a tall mountain range called the Grand Cayman as its base and was one of the neutral zones, even though it seemed like an ordinary place. That place was home to overs, orcs, goblins, elves, and the Imagi, a serpent known for becoming a dragon. They used troll blood, over tendons, and entire monsters as materials to craft armor and weapons. Harpies' feathers became accessories and elves became pets for high-class ladies. The reason for trying to conquer a neutral zone like that forest was probably pure human greed. Besides that, the boy knew that the subjugation would fail completely. The Iron Blood Knight Order lost a third of its mites in that battle, and it was practically the same for private soldiers of the other nobles. The terrible defeat that caused the king of the nation the support of the public and the nobles. That probably started the division within the kingdom, and later, the civil war broke out. The guy at the table shouted that the real problem was the king, drawing attention, but his friends stopped him from continuing the speech, since they were in public, and that was very dangerous. But it cleansing since something like that there. Other tables, men stared at him in disbelief, trying to convince themselves he was just another drunk. Jack realized the guy truly wasn't afraid after all. It was impossible to count how many people had lost their heads for insulting royalty. He snapped out of his trance when his name was mentioned at the table. They were referring to him as the third young master of the Marcus's house. One of the brief's friends said there were rumors that Jack had used forbidden magic. Said then the other two friends didn't seem to believe since they thought he was a complete idiot, and they INVINCIBLE them. They had no idea of who they were talking about. The blonde even asked how that loser had learned forbidden magic since the mage who taught it had died long ago. While the woman laughed, asking if the boy was of the fool of the Marcus family, he must have tripped over something somewhere. The girl who had offered the fool returned, asking what was so funny about that whole conversation. Her question confused Jack until he realized he was smiling while listening to it. She sat down next to the boy, cheerfully asking if he wasn't going to tell her since she was really bored. However, he declined, stating it was nothing much, just that the third gun master of the Marcus house is an idiot, according to what he heard. And he confessed he had been eavesdropping on the conversation, and the woman said people were like that. They judge everything based on rumors. Then he asked what she was like when it came to judging others. Smiling, the woman explained that she judged things after seeing them for herself because rumors were just rumors. The boy countered, saying that rumors could be true sometimes, something she agreed with. But she didn't elaborate much as Jack grabbed a piece of pie and bit into it eagerly. It wasn't as good as the one his butler used to make, but still tasted amazing. The one had decided to end his subject by saying it was just what she thought. But if a third gun master of the Marcus house was attractive compared to the rumors, she didn't think they were true. That left Jack surprised. She asked what was wrong as he analyzed the woman who had a scar on her cheek of body covered in muscles and mercenaries as regular clients. So the boy asked if she was a branch manager of the Adventurers Guild around there, catching her off guard, but Sue smiled, embarrassed. Of course, he wasn't just making the random guess. There were mercenaries at ever see, wandering around looking for mirth. There were be soldiers in territorial battles, help people search for things, and even act as monster hunters. These jobs were distributed by local guilds, which were usually located near inns. That made Jack suggest the woman had a lot of free time. There was no other way she could be a branch manager and also managing an at the same time. And the blonde explained that even though there wasn't much to do lately, she needed a way to make money in such a quiet territory like Below. It seemed that the inn was actually a lodging owned by the Adventurers Guild. The protagonist commented that the one was doing something pretty bold, and even that he was known as the idiot at the Marcus house. He wasn't famous, not even close. However, the woman had recognized him in such a remote place. How would a guild branch manager be capable of that? Until they realized the real reason for the recognition. Upon seeing the village, the boy had spoken to his course, saying he knew they would find some kind of society nearby. However, before entering, he was stopped by two guards who asked why he was coming to the city and if there was anyone else with him. Jack simply showed his family's crest as a good enough reason to do whatever he wanted. Only recognizing the crest as a Marcus family, one of the guards apologized for not recognizing the boy at first, and both bowed, asking him to enjoy a stay and allowed him to enter. Back at the bar, he suggested that the girl had heard everything from the guards, warning that contacting a private soldier without the Lord's permission was very dangerous. That made her laugh, suggesting the little one was worried about her life. He gave a crippet smile, saying yes, for now, at least the woman was being nice to him. Even if she only heard rumors about him, unlike his brother and the knights he tried to annihilate. She thanked him and extended her hand to greet him, introducing herself as Jane Below. As they shook hands, her last name made the boy very curious. That was the name of the territory they were in. Understanding the situation, Jane explained that she was the third daughter, and her older brother was the lord of the region. She was a noble working as a mercenary. Although that was something only commoners usually did, she was an incredible woman. The boy asked if nobles didn't usually send women to marry out with age, but the girl had loved that job, with saying no man in her family would upsell her. But the girl different from Judge's family, so much so that it made him envious. But all he said was that it was a great household. Jane called the little dog, and the two again to play a bit while she continued the conversation, asking what the young master of the Marcus house was doing alone in a place like that with no escort. To which the boy replied that an idiot didn't need any escort. His answer left Jane stunned. Turns out he was quite funny, which was unexpected, but she already suspected he would be different from the rumors. Jack said that even so, he had a long run ahead of him and would MD like to hire set escorts, at most 5 people with experience camping and good cooking skills, if possible. The reward would be 2 gold coins in advance and 3 upon arrival. Jane's eyes sparkled, seeing how generous the boy was. It was true, after all. Merchant escort missions cost 30 coins per person. The kingdom's monetary humans were quite simple. It took 100 coins to make 1 gold. so they were of lower value. The one committed to preparing everything by the next day and asked if he would pay for food and lodging separately. He pulled free gold coins from a bag and handed it to her, asking her to prepare everything and, if possible, also arrange a carriage of horses. He was indeed a very generous client. Kindly, she told him not to worry and to rest, and she guaranteed she'd gather only veterans, handing him the key. Since such a fun woman was a branch manager, nothing bad should happen in that city. Upon entering his room, Jack collapsed directly onto the bed as he was exhausted. He hadn't thought about taking a bath but fell asleep before he could. Suddenly, the boy woke up in chains in what seemed to be a cage, but suddenly caught in a pitiful tide. He cried while this person asked if he would keep living so powerless forever. Tears fell endlessly from his eyes. Although being kind wasn't a sin, the woman considered being incompetent a grave one, so she asked if he wanted to change. With a trembling voice, the boy said yes. That's why the green-haired woman took his hand, congratulating him and wrapping him in a hug, saying that from that day forward, she would be his master. However, Jack woke up sweating in his bed. It was just a nightmare. Memories of his time with his master. As time was chiming outside, indicating it was already morning. He didn't even have time to process the dream because Jane burst through the door wishing him good morning and shouted it, asking if she didn't know how to knock. With her was Arnold, who jumped excitedly on top of the boy, looking him all over. As he went down the stairs with a suitcase, the boy on sleepily, while Jane said he must have had a great night's sleep. That's why she had prepared high-quality transportation for him. And she introduced the men who would accompany him, making sure all were veterans. Ironically, among them were the guys who had been talking nonsense about him, now clearly embarrassed. The captain of the fire ant mercenary group introduced himself to Jack as John Doe. His nickname confused the boy. Smiling kindly, John Doe explained that it was a name given to unidentified corpses around there. He was blatantly using a fake name, but the protagonist ignored it and said it was a funny name as he shook his hand. The man said it would be a long journey from there to the Rocky Mountain, and they wouldn't have to camp about tourism on the way. His two friends had once been chefs and had camped so many times that could be considered veterans, but all that mattered to Jack was leisure. So the young master handed him his suitcase and hurried them, since he was already tired. Thus, the escort moved out of the place, but before leaving, the MC commented to the girl that she had introduced him to a very entertaining mercenary, and Jane reaffirmed that he was indeed a veteran. That would be the case if he were a normal mercenary. Wrong was from the 9th Circle, and he hid his identity and power for his own reasons. But German nobody, the 8th Circle mercenary in front of him, was hiding only his power for no real reason. Smiling, the woman asks if he hadn't said he wanted a veteran, and ignoring the question, the little one says he thought the two of them would meet again soon, and she assures him they'll have a beer together next time. He winks at Jane, saying he'd consider it if she paid it for the last round, and finally leaves the establishment. From inside, she wishes him a good trip, as she already had a certain fineness for the little master. During the journey, the boy had rested in his cart. It wouldn't luxurious, but it was good enough. Besides, it was a beautiful day outside, and he felt much better than the day before. While playing with his Mana, the MC notices that Joe Nobody was staring at him, wondering if there was a reason for that. He stands up, catching the blonde man's attention, and takes the opportunity to ask if he had any idea who the little guy was. Stammering, the man says he only heard that he was the son of a high-ranking noble. Jack pretends not to understand, asking him to continue, and the blonde man says that the branch manager believed the boy was traveling the world. The protagonist reveals he was very curious about Jane, so the guy tells him to feel free to ask anything. So Jack takes a pocket watch with his family crest from his coat and hands it to the man. Looking closely, asks if that was the crest of Noble House. However, by the look on his face, Jack concludes that the guy knew what it was about, but not exactly. So he explains that around there was the house of a big idiot marquis named Valentier that would soon fall, and that was a crest representing the house. His words leave the men in complete silence. Jack says that thinking about it, he believes there was someone people used to call an idiot in that house. And smiling, he asked if the blonde man also knew something about an idiot who even got arrested some time ago. His discretion makes a man tremble to the core. Finally, he seems someone had figured out who he was, which didn't surprise him, since the boy explained it all so well to them. After he got out of prison, a rumor about using forbidden magic or something like that spread, he explains. Seeing the tension on the blonde man's face, he asks if there was a problem, telling him to laugh like the day before. But all the guy says is, "I'm sorry." Only, he wasn't completely wrong. After all, the MC really did know a bit about forbidden magic. His master wasn't complete about crimes and enchantment. Even as a swordsman, it was impossible not to know about forbidden sorcery. However, Jack argues that there was no reason to use something like that when his fists were in perfect shape. When he refers to Joe Nobody, the man jumps nervously at being called, and a protagonist questions why he didn't say anything when his friend was spotting nonsense about him, since he did when it was about the king, pretending to be deeply hurt by the situation, leaving everyone there confused. Except for the group's leader, who makes up an excuse about being kind of poorly informed to everyone. The manager of that branch must have told him who Jack was and kept it a secret from the other mercenaries. Either way, he asked them to forget the past, since they'd be together for the next few days. something Joe nobody accepts, still anxious about the whole situation. That night they sit around the fireplace commenting on how rumors were really just rumors. Jack is surprised by this talk, and the blonde man says it's because the boy didn't resemble other nobles who usually hated getting your hands dirty. Meanwhile, the boy was even doing the dishes, which made him quite different. The comments surprising, the food was spectacular. And the MC had a belly full of the best things possible, in a terrible peace, except for the memory of Ron, who was surely suffering from his absence. Jack explains that this was the payment for a delicious dinner, and he was quite the gourmet. Thinking about it, the guy gets curious about how the guys handled the night watch, and the man explains that they drew lots. Jokingly, he asked if Jack would also like to participate, leaving him soggy, since a little boy like him needed sleep to grow, and he asked if the guy would take responsibility if he didn't grow. So, bite a differ grow it. As they were bored, they decided to start sharing stories, and the MC asks what they should talk about first. When he chooses a topic, he asked how many dragons existed in that world. He doubted the group had ever stopped to think about something like that. The guys were called a founding king, or whatever he was, who had exterminated dragons several centuries ago. It was the legend of the founding kingdom. Stripping away all the nonsense, it could be summed up just like that. Julius Tesla exterminated all the dragons, conquered a western continent, and built his empire in the former state of the Krakingen. However, over time the empire became a kingdom, having been reduced to a subordinate nation of the Tolkien Empire. Up to that point was the story everyone knew. Jack elaborates, stating that there were 2 dragon lords in the Black Sea, a baby dragon in the Imperial House, and 5 in the Forest of Magical Beasts. There are 8 wandering around, at least that I know of, polymorphous, so just on that continent there were at least 16 dragons, they explains. They obviously wouldn't believe the whole story. Besides dragons only appearing in legends, no one had ever seen one until now. Thinking about it, the boy laughs, asking if that story wasn't actually funny, and explains that dragons couldn't mix with human beings after all, a pact that could put their very existence at risk prevented them. Germemony asked if that meant the founding king hadn't actually wiped out all the dragons, which was exactly the case. He hadn't exterminated any dragons, he just wanted an opportunity to negotiate with them. To be precise, the ones who did everything were his 2 mainless supporters, but that wasn't something he intended to sue with the Discord. But the man asks what the 2 dragons were doing and Jack explained that the continent they knew was not actually the whole world. It was just the western part. On the other side of the sea, things were different. Except for the baby dragon. He says the dragon lords had a single mission, to guard the barrier in the Black Sea. Joe nobody asked about the barrier, but the Lu one didn't know the details about it either, except that it was something ancient that separated the continents, and the dragon lords had basically inherited the mission to protect it. To be honest, he was also curious about what kind of world the East was. After all that chatter, there was no worry around it, and the friends burst into laughter. So much nonsense. The blind man approaches Jack, saying he was a great storyteller, and must have asked for companions just to have someone to talk to on his journey. The boy smiles, even knowing that no one took him seriously. He already expected that they wouldn't believe him anyway. The young man stands up, stating that it didn't matter whether they believed Ken or not. Seeing that the boy was heading to the carriage, the mercenary asks if he's already going to sleep. The boy confirms, seeing he's going to take a bath and change clothes first. He even tries to offer an escort for that, but Jack refuses, saying he could bathe on his own. Upon entering the water and the protagonist sighs in relief, those noisy mercenaries didn't believe his story, which might seem strange since he mentioned real facts and still told everything. A protagonist hiding his power was boring, that's why he talked too much. Jack continues enjoying the relaxing hot springs, but thinking about Joe Nobody, he reflects that he doubted the man was a spice and by Tolkien. He was a little strange and the branch manager was also somewhat suspicious. If you thought about it, the situation seemed like a puzzle piece that didn't quite fit. He asked Jane to introduce mercenaries who could escort him, but an 8th Circle mana user hiding his name wasn't exactly what he expected. Someone as powerful as an 8th Circle. The captain of the Iron Blood Knights was also 8th Circle. In other words, someone who would be welcome with open arms wherever he went, shown up as the captain of just any mercenary group. Could there be some hidden circumstance? Instead of bothering with that, he needed to do something first and begins his managed circummission in water. He had recovered a lot from the after effects of the soul speech or in a stay at the inn and in the carriage. He shouldn't have any problems with this. Even so, now all that mattered was his destination, which would lead him toward his master. As long as there was suspicion that Joe Nobody might be a spy, he preferred not to take him along. So he had no choice but to ask him directly. Returning to the fire, the man is surprised by how quickly he bathed. The boy now held his sword, explaining that he was more bothered than he thought and couldn't continue the bath. The guys ask what was bothering him. The question sounds like an insult to the boy, who asks if they were really that lost in the situation. Pointing the sword at one of the members, he states that the man had bothered him, and he asks Joe Nobody why an 8th Circle mana user was doing mercenary work. Jack reveals that the place he was heading to is very important, of great significance, and he didn't want to take someone like him who's clearly hiding something. The blonde man steps in to defend his friend, asking, "What you mean? My boss is 8th Circle? but Joe Nobody quickly interrupts him. And assuming he merely was 8th circle, he asks what the boy would do, and I quote. Jack says that since he had told an interesting story, it was his turn to tell one. He wanted to hear a very interesting story about the guy in front of him. German Nobody asks what would happen if he refused. Then the boy brings his sword closer, saying that if he couldn't satisfy him, he'd become feed. Or could it be that you were a spy from the Tolkien Empire? He asks, making one of the men tremble. He throws out a feeler, saying that Jane had told him they have a beer together next time. But if he was a spy, why should he trust the woman? The expression on the mercenary leader's face changes completely. He questions why the boy was suddenly talking about Jane. The MC asks if, even after everything he had said, the guy didn't know. And wasn't he curious to know whether the woman's last meal would be a beer or not? Smiling innocently, he asked what Joe Nobody thinks, commenting that the situation was getting quite entertaining. The tension in the air was noticeable. Jack had pushed the guy to this point, and yet his mana circle didn't move. He was either being cautious or hesitating. What a lucky man. The boy says he couldn't control this strength well, so he couldn't be a half buck. He was planning the cutting down the mawing him of this circle. The truth was easy. Die or live. So he gave him a minute and hoped the man made the right decision. Yesterday at James' Inn, the woman had been talking to Joe about how Jack was a fascinating child, different from the rumors. From that little boy's eyes, she could tell he was hiding a lot. She was the one to request an escort mission for Joe Nobody. After all, you never know. A boy like that could change her lives. Who would look into those eyes and call him a retard abandoned because of her? Anyway, in a present, there was nothing more to say. Joe Nobody was getting a stealing from that boy, like a herbivore saying in front of a lion. His intuition screamed that he was dangerous. It was strange now that he stopped to think about it. How in the first place had the boy discovered that he was 8th circle? Could Jane have given him some hint? No, German Nobody dismisses that illusion. There was no way she had done that. He trusted her, and she would have told him if she had said anything. In front of him, the boy continued the countdown 40 seconds, where the man finally speaks up. He suggests that if he really were 8th circle, the boy wouldn't be able to hit in. The man sears at the boy, wondering how a child could have such a fierce gaze, that he doesn't bat then. One before him didn't even seem like a child. Meanwhile, his friend was dying of nervousness, begging him to just tell the truth. Jim Nobody didn't know where to start. He was in a situation where he felt like he could be devoured any moment. The countless choices he had made in his years as a mercenary flashed before his eyes. But as someone who had always been on the lucky side, he decides to trust his instincts. Time had already run out, and since he wasn't satisfied, the guy was going to be taken out. However, before the board could advance, the man sent something. Actually, he asked about Jane's situation. He wanted to mount the MC knew everything. Jeff Nobody's story was quite short. A love between the daughter of a noble and a random commoner. A common tale heard anywhere. He met Jane when she was 19 and he was 7th circled. They fell in love at first sight, and the seeds of love that continued to grow ever since. It wasn't very surprising. Apparently there was a very personal reason why they hadn't married yet, but even being a commoner and a noble, someone of 8th circle would be highly influential. Someone like that doing mercenary work was still strange. Jack even considered that the leader might have caused some sort of problem. Well, considering that woman's personality, her host might have considered profit. Trying to make sense of it all, the protagonist asks if Jane was really just the branch manager of the Adventurers Guild in a small territory and he just a mercenary, taking the opportunity to ask if he only approached him to see if he could gain some benefit, something the man confirms. But the protagonist doesn't know whether to trust him. A story like that could easily be made up. Staring intensely at Joe Nobody, the boy asks could he thought the Empire was doing with the baby dragon. The man replies with another question. How could I know about a fairy tale? His answer makes the boy smile. And he explains that Master is a title used for those who have carved 10 circles into their hearts. But even they don't know that beyond that, there is an even deeper realm, with monsters that use the power of souls instead of manner. The so-called transcendence. The information shocks everyone in the escort, except their leader. Then the boy continues. In 2 years, Hanky's Beckerman, the Knight of the Tolkien Imperial Guard, will be proclaimed the strongest swordsman on the continent, and he explains that you will end up continuing the story of the transcendence you existed only in forgotten history. But interestingly, that unfortunate man did not become a transcendent through his own strength. It was quite an interesting story, and the man asked the boy to go on. Jack says that the swordsman replaced his blood and half of his bones with those of a dragon. Because of that, he became a being that was neither human nor dragon. The look on Joe Nobody's face said it all. Everyone, they were shocked. The idea of someone becoming a hybrid was completely absurd. But the man questions, what does that story have to do with the current situation? And the boy explains that there's only one dragon in the Tolkien Imperial House Dan. Even though they are nearly immortal beings, few experiments can be done with only one. That's why they sent several people to other countries. The first objective was to gather information. The second was to confirm the existence of other dragons. That last part makes the escort leader burst out laughing and say it was pretty amazing for a piece of fiction. Without looking at the other mercenaries, the boy is sure they wouldn't believe the man telling this story. Judging by his reaction, so Nobody didn't seem to be a spy after all. Crossing his arms, he asks, so, Now to your suspicion, Christ. The boy confirms, wishing him a beautiful life with the loyal guilt manager, reminding him to invite him to the wedding. However, something catches the boy's attention and he quickly positions his sword behind him. Jim Nobody, with the tip of a blade at his neck, had been caught trying to draw his sword first. Jack makes it very clear that he's only letting him live because he was the one who doubted the man in the first place. He pulls the guy close and whispers, so only he can hear. This is the last time. If you let the juice thirst rise again, I'll turn everyone here, including here, the dust. They miss the rest of the group turmoil, and they ask both of them to lower their swords and talk. The boy had done his best to get closer to the group, but it was no use anymore. The relationship between boss and employee was always complicated. After all that mess, Jack retreats to the carriage to sleep. All the men talk about what happened. One of them asks why someone with the potential to be a noble's mate captain chose to be a mercenary. The blonde man remembers that when they met, the leader said he was only fourth circle, and the lie made him upset. But since they had fought together for years and the fan had said his life fourth and want to be hearthful then. Having an eighth circle in the group was reassuring, as it would strengthen the mercenaries as the most powerful on the continent. That way the man could become a mercenary king, but Joe and Nobody doubted that was possible. He thought about how his companions saw everything as a joke, since an eighth circle would never be a mercenary king, hardly fur-known mercenary masters, but he decides to shrug it off instead of arguing with his old companion. A young man in the group asks if everything that was said was true, and the leader confirms, even if it was shrugging. The blondie calms the group, saying that everyone has was said confirms, but he questions why the captain didn't react. Memories of the confrontation surface in the man's mind, making him sweat even after everything had passed. His hands still tremble, and the sensation of being between life and death remains vivid in him. He won't admit it, but he almost peed himself in fear. As Jane said, the boy was interesting but dangerous. The continent was already in chaos because of the war for the Token Empire's throne, but this situation was different. Spies, dragons, and everything else gave him a bad feeling, like a warning to investigate more deeply. Days later, inside the carriage, Jack asks that they want to hear another interesting story. The mercenaries' expressions turn tense, afraid of what he might say next. The boy asks how much they know about the Lord of the Forest and magical beasts. They explain that they only know the Maustars at the max circle, but Jack reveals that, in fact, it's at the 10th. This surprises them, but he says everyone will find out in due time. Well, you wanted to tell us about the past. His words make the man curious, and Jack goes back in time 23 years ago, when there were rumors about the Lord of the Forest and the Harpy Lord. The mercenaries admit that had never heard of that, and Jack explains that orcs and harpies had always fought throughout history. They wage war for any reason, and any mercenary who entered the forest would know that. These two races are considered the strongest in a forest. Sometimes when it's guardians, do their pair. Jack says the Harpy Queen and the Orc King had a relationship, even though it's hard to believe. At first, they were just peaceful neighbors, but when black men became the Orc Lord, everything changed. 5 years later, problems arose, and the men got curious about that, making the boy smile. Continuing, when the romance between black men and the Harpy Lord was discovered, there was a revolt among their races. Jack explains that humans, harpies, and orcs are different only by race, but all desire power, and that caused betrayal. Part of the orcs and harpies expelled their leers and Matranisad, using the forbidden romance as an excuse. But the plan failed and the traitors were destroyed. Joe Nobody asks why the relationship between the races remained bad to this day, and Jack replies that black men and Valea separated. They prioritized the prosperity of their races over love, which makes sense but left behind the legacy of hatred. The leader of the mercenary group doesn't know if the story is true, but remembers that the harpies and arcs used to be less dangerous. A few decades ago, the student became stronger and gained the title of dominant races. The MC continues saying that the harpies learned battle techniques from the arcs, and the arcs learned the secret arts of spiritancy, used only by the harpies. This exchange of knowledge was only possible because of Blackman and Valea separating the races. Now they represent the forest, and if Joe Nobody is captured by one of them, Jack suggests telling this story. That way, maybe they won't eliminate him immediately. And the man, looking at the boy's angelic face, agrees to try. Changing the subject, he offers Jackson drag meat, Jihable accepts. Jane Haperpedic, and was delicious. Far from there, in the Marquis Palace, the man receives the shocking news about the attack on the third young masters of sports. All forces were destroyed in the mountains near or below, and his informant reveals that expert investigators say it was advanced magic. This enrages the Lord, as it happened while the Iron Blood Knights were away. He suspects the king or the duke lost him in a possible third threat. So he orders Gonzalez to investigate thoroughly, and he nods in confirmation. The old man hesitates and asks about Jack's whereabouts, since Tifbani was not sacked, which suggests that the boy might have escaped. But if that were the case, he might hear something that interests the Lord, so he gives Gonzalez full authority to get answers. Before the redhead leaves, the Lord comments that he used to think his son was useless, but maybe he was wrong. That makes the informant stare at him seriously before leaving, thoughtful about what really happened. The next day, the boy and the group are already at the entrance of Rocky Mountain, and Jaw hands a sack of coins to Joe Nobody. The man is amazed by so much money, nervous as he receives it, saying it is too much from. Jack, however, explains that he only needed 10 gold coins and some healing potions. The rest was theirs. With a kind smile, the boy thanks them for not letting the journey be boring, apologizes for doubting Joe Nobody. But now it's time to part ways, so he wishes them well on the way back. The men, however, remain still, making Jack ask if they were going to leave soon. Joe Nobody acknowledges that he might be meddling, but asks for permission to speak anyway. With the boy's permission, he says that being a mercenary wasn't as bad as the MC imagined. He says that a mercenary point in his statement, and the man continues, trying to explain his reasoning. He says that even without knowing all the details, he's seen how young masters without support usually end up. The third young master of a noble family, completely alone, was a strange and dangerous situation. Jack asks if he's suggesting that he become a mercenary, and Joe Nobody grabs his shoulders firmly and repeats that mercenary work wasn't as bad as he thought. If he avoided dangerous missions, he could travel the world and live a comfortable life without great risks. Jack points to the other boys, knowing they had no idea what Joe Nobody understood all too well. That night they faced each other. If the boy had wanted to, he could have destroyed him easily, even without using his full strength. The older man knew this, and for that reason found it even more unfortunate that he wouldn't become a mercenary, since he knew his talent better than anyone, and he admits he had already forgotten what happened before. In a world where one day he picked up a sword to survive, he hid his strength even from his companions. Hating to admit it, he says it was all his fault, and Jack thanks him for the words, but states that he'll pretend he never heard that. Since German Nobody was different from the others, without giving many details, MC talks about a future event, something big that would happen in the West in a few years. And he asks the man to hive when the time comes, confusing the mercenary. But the boy says he wouldn't understand now, that he would feel it when the time was right. It would be an overwhelming sensation, as if it were something too big to handle, and he would need to run. Handing over the sack of coins, Jack advises, don't risk your life for a bit of gold because nothing is worth more than living. The man fully agrees. Leaving our boy satisfied to be understood, he gives a friendly pat on his shoulder. Before leaving, the boy once again asks them to take care on the way back and prepares to enter the forest alone. German Nobody asks if he can know his real name, and Jack smiles, knowing he already suspected. The protagonist introduces himself as Jack and asks to be remembered only like that, without titles or surnames. Taking the moment, the boy asked for Joe Nobody's real name, who hesitates before answering. He reveals his name as Dynastismo. The protagonist then says that, if fate allows, they will meet again in the future. Finally, Jack continues his journey, crossing a long bridge using manner to move faster. He feels he is close to the destination, passing by giant stones that he can only endure thanks to his young body. His movements, however, are no longer as agile as before, and he has to stop to catch his breath. Upon reaching Achaia, he lights the way of the small manosphere, confirming he's in the right place. All this left is to cross a great stone wall to find his master, just as he did in the past. Finding that place before was a coincidence, the result of his escape from home and the suffocating exhaustion of that miserable life. Jack opens a flask and pours the liquid on the wall while wrapping his hands around his sword. He knew there was only one file stack left, to round his hand on the blade and his sword sacrifice. The boy stares at the sword, aware that this small act was more important than it seemed. Before returning to age 17, Jack had only been running and hiding just as he always did in his past life. For heaven, who had even lost wrong at that time, running seemed like the only possible choice. His trembling hands could barely complete the small necessary sacrifice, and he cried like a child. For someone like him, opening the stone cave had been nothing short of a miracle. Now he found himself in the same position as before, but this time things would be different. As he crossed the doors, the boy showed confidence in his steps, knowing the place well. He descended a staircase lit by a small lamp, though he felt a growing nervousness. It was understandable, since more than a decade had passed since his last visit to the place. At the bottom of the stairs, he felt at his knees upon seeing the sight that awaited him. There was his master, a chain as before, with wide eyes upon hearing the boy's call. Jack wondered whether forms of life could truly become immortal someday, not just the powerful, but anyone who wished to live forever. Monsters as emperors all would eventually die. This was an unchanging universal law. The same truth seemed to apply to the person before him, despite her unique abilities. His master from the past had lived at least 400 years using a body-soul separation technique. However, there was a magic that kept the connection between them. But even that extraordinary magic was now reaching its natural limit. Yet met her when was 10 years old, but the current situation was different. This time, you would have no more than 13 years to spend with his dear master. The Warren in the form of a chained doll asked if the Warren truly called her master, leaving him emotional. He had longed to hear that voice for so long, feeling a wave of overwhelming nostalgia. She shows curiosity about the boy's identity, asking if she should try to guess. The dollar asks if this was some kind of joke to the boy. She wanted to know who the boy was, and he would not get a third chance to introduce himself. Laughing, he comments that her temper seems to have gotten much worse over the years, and says he missed her a lot all this time, provoking even more confusion in the woman. She finds it interesting to have a disappoint she doesn't even know, asking if he knows who she is. Abua nods affirmatively. After all, how could he forget someone so important? The time they spent together was extremely valuable to him. More than just a dream. Even if it was something only he remembered, those memories were real in his heart. Then he introduces himself as the hero who ended the age of glory and began the age of humans, informing Valentine Milos, the great sources, that he was her disciple from the future, causing total bewilderment in the woman. What do you mean from the future? She hated storytellers and their inventions, asking if he already knew the answer. The woman knew it perfectly, stating that it was because stories always distort the truth with subjectivity. The noise, she says she should call him boy with the potential to be a storyteller, and ask what someone like her would say in such an absurd situation, challenging his claims. The atmosphere grows tense, but the only thing that comes to the boy's mind is a simple, at lost. That was probably exactly what she would say, recognizing his talent for imitating her. She jokes that the boy has a talent for storytelling and could make a career out of it, which is fancying a big as he calls her master. The way incorrectly corrects him. She is no one's master. Her response only confirms she never changed. She was the same person as before. Realizing that words are enough, the boy gets up, determined to act differently. In a swift motion, he points his sword directly at the chain woman. He apologizes for his insolence, but he knew it was necessary. With the sword pointed at her, the woman realizes that Jack can use soul aura. He says he may be being disrespectful, but he will humbly accept any punishment after doing what must be done. This makes her nervous, and she warned him that if he breaks her chains, the entire police will collapse. Jack knew that, indeed, that was exactly why he intended to break them without hesitation. He advances toward the woman, the one who had taught Julius Tesla, the so-called hero. Julius had made a promise to his master that he would return for her, but he never fulfilled it. It took 50 years for the woman to finally understand that she had been abandoned by that coward. Jack acts quickly, destroying all the dragon bone chains that held her. Valentine screams when she realizes she's about to fall to the ground, but is caught by the protagonist, who screams her that it's completely different from its scoundrel Julius. Because he doesn't just talk, he acts accordingly. She holds back her tears as she remembers the past, but the moment is interrupted by the collapse. The ceiling begins to cave in due to the shockwave, and Jack tells her to hold on tight. He knew that Earth could be manipulated, so he activates 4 techniques simultaneously: Mountain of Wind, Forest, Fire, and Mountain. While holding the woman in his arms, he unleashes a blast of mana capable of blowing up entire mountains. Faced with such power, his master asks again if he really is oppressed. Jack insists that he's just her disciple because that's all that matters, not his origin or age. She's surprised that someone so young can master soul energy so well, and the MC jokes that he's a disciple from the future, and informs her that they would spend the next 13 years traveling together. The woman brings her face closer to his, trying to discern whether he's lying or not. This time, she seems to soften a little and slowly asks if the boy really came from the future. Jack explains that it was more irrational and timed a proper journey. It seemed like he was tying the future. When he realizes that she finally believes him, the border collapses to the ground before he can celebrate. The master warns that forced relationships never work, but he has his answer ready, arguing that if he hadn't acted like that, they would never have any kind of connection or relationship. But she didn't consider something like that a relationship. Valentine acknowledges that he's pretty good at arguing for someone in so much pain, and he asks who she thinks he inherited all that stubbornness from. Taking a moment, he formally introduces himself as Jack, featured disciple, and stakes that he will submit to her guidance in this life as well. 5 days later, in the territory of INVINCIBLE, Jack was questioning how his master had remained silent all this time. He wanted to know if she was so organizing her thoughts or she had simply chosen not to speak. At first, she had said she thought he was a descendant of House Teslan, but that was impossible. No one his age should be able to use soul. She begins to talk about the nature of soul power, but stops in the middle of the sentence, as if waiting for him to finish it. Jack knew that if he answered wrong, he would be punished, just like in his previous life. It explains that it was a power only a few selected among the mana masters could use. The master confirms this, but highlights that the energy accumulated in his soul was abnormal. That makes him smile. Even though he wanted to talk about his past life, Valentine's silence got in the way. She observes that his hands carried more dark energy than hers, which surpasses even Jack. Then she asks if he ever wondered why he received such a rare opportunity as time regression. He spent 5 days trying to guess what she was thinking, but in truth, she only wanted to understand the regression. Memories from his past life surface, nights destroying entire villages without compassion. Jack admits he had thought about it, honestly, had no idea why he was granted such grace. Seeing her serious expression, he asks her not to make that face. He explains further. The regression wasn't by his own will. Sir and granted to him, there must have been a clear purpose. If that were the case, his person would show up one day. If not, he would simply continue with his life. The time he now spent with her was the most important thing, regardless of any mystery. The master comments that at least his words were beautiful, and then asks what his plans are. Jack replies that he wants to find a companion. He needed someone he could trust. The night he rescued Valentine, he had fallen seriously ill. He had to secretly drink 2 high-level portions and even then was on the brink of death for several days. His body needed someone to protect him, to be his arms and legs or several. But for now, he would simply go shopping with a girl. He also needed a new sword. But then both of them were bumped into by a girl shouting for passage, who ended up dropping the flowers from her basket. She apologized, explaining she was in a hurry. Jack replied that they also were paying attention and asked if she was okay. That's when he realized he had just said he wanted someone by his side, and here was a possible candidate. While the young lady was collecting the flowers on her own, he inquired whether she would be willing to become his wife. While selecting the flowers on left her visibly taken a quiet. Jack proceeded to offer the entirety of the contents within his bag as compensation. However, she declined, stating that the amount was far too excessive. A single coin, she explained, would have been more than sufficient, as it corresponded precisely to the value of the flower basket she carried. Thus, Jack completed the payment, and she handed him all the flowers. Before departing, she made a hurried bow, leaving Jack standing still, silently observing. His master remarked that it had been a long time since she had last seen a nocturnal being. Jack agreed, appealing a statement immediately. However, upon reflecting on the information, he assumed a more serious demeanor and questioned the master. The young woman did not appear to possess any unusual traits. Valentine appeared confused. Should assume he'd approached the girl precisely because he knew her true nature. In reality, Jack had chosen her because he recognized in her the potential necessary to reach the 10th circle with proper training. Now on his shoulder, the woman couldn't believe he had noticed something so obvious. Clearly, he still had a lot to learn. Jack laughed and asked her to teach him everything. Dependent on him. She said he was exactly as she remembered, even after the regression. The green-haired master still found the situation odd. That child felt strangely familiar. Old memories surfaced in her mind, a blonde girl dancing in a garden. Everything began to make sense, and to think that now she was reduced to living in that village. Meanwhile, Jack thought that after they finished shopping, he needed to find someone important. The night creatures were raised comparable to dragons in power. What the shop assistant spoke, Jack recalled the conflict between those two racers and happened many years ago. It began when the vampires tried to escape from the forest of magical beasts. Despite their defeat, many took advantage of the war to flee, which meant that the girl from earlier was likely the daughter of one of those fugitives. But Jack didn't care about her origin, whether she was a my creature or the child of one. The shop assistant kept raising his choice of sword, but her excessive details irritated him. He cut the conversation short, asking her to finalize the purchase. Calling his master, Jack announced that he had already chosen his first subordinate. She doubted whether he chosen minister what he was doing had chosen a now creature. The protagonist argued that children carry no sins of the past. The master insisted he was just making things up to rationalize his decision, which made him laugh. In the past, she had made a non-aggression pact with the kings of each race, including the dragons. According to the agreement, all races except humans should not interfere with the human world. Therefore, all other races moved to the magical forest. However, that happened 400 years ago, so most of the kings who signed the pact were already buried. Even free from the pact, the creatures can't escape because the dragons slew most of them. And since they live about 2,000 years, they were oppressing everyone there to keep the promise, motivated by their own imprisonment. The master made the right decision, but Jack thinks they should have exterminated the dragons, just like he did in his past life, finishing them off one by one after discovering what was going on. Observing the vampire girl, he sees Emergent casually pat her head and calls Valentine's attention. She notices the scars on her fingers, but Jack reassures her, saying she doesn't need to blame herself. He never vet the situation, eating if he didn't know are the details. Reaffirms that, regardless of what he told others, he was her disciple. She tells the boy to do what he thinks is best, but warns him not to give his juice to the blonde under any circumstances, leaving him confused. After all, the girl is just a child who deserves good food, not restrictions. Later, the girl still blushes remembering how Jack spoke kindly to her. She carries a cup of org juice for her sick mother, following family rules. Her mother always warned her never to drink human juice. More specifically, the wonder mother by her nevo. In fact, she wondered if you would visit them that day, announcing her arrival at home. As she is nothing, she continues walking toward her mother's room, asking if she was asleep. The woman recognizes the little girl with a weak voice and warns that they had a visitor, but she sees no one, until she notices Jack there. Nervous, she spills a little of the juice. Meanwhile, Valentine orders the woman lying down to show her face, and so she does, revealing her pale blue eyes. It's been a long time, whispers the sorceress as the woman recognizes her in shock. She wants to know what she was doing in such a rotten place, and in such a deplorable state. After all, she was Vivienne de Royal, the noble vampire progenitor. Outside the apartment, the Lou Blonde plays distractedly with birds while Jack watches her bored, but he stays alert to the women talking inside the house, hoping for the best. Vivienne asks who that woman by her side is, suggesting she could be a vampire hunter. Valentine is surprised to realize the vampire didn't recognize her immediately. So su predecessor e Valentine Miles, means Vivienne Schroeder, all over, and confirms that she was the one who confined the vampires in the forest of magical beasts, her mortal enemy. Her trembling voice reveals her fear, but she tries to stay firm before her old foe. However, a harsh cough interrupts her speech. Valentine explains she is under a curse. It can now only live as a human 1 night per month. Without missing words, she questions again why a vampire progenitor is in such a deplorable state. Noticing that Vivian hasn't drunk her red juice in ages, she demands an acidination about her condition. The vampire asks back if Valentine's feeling sorry for her, which seems ironic, and says that, in the past, the mage was so great and powerful that she would never dare come near her. It's not like she held a grudge over what happened in the forest or anything like that, since, if it weren't for the woman, it might have been wiped out by the enraged humans. Therefore, she would answer the question. Vivian explains that there were 5 Terrans and 2 lords controlling the vampires in the forest. They tried to escape during the war as her daughter was far too young for that hell, and she painfully remembers the dragon who spared them, offering exile in the village because she was too pitiful. A word echoes in Valentine's mind. Vivian explains that the condition was to live there drinking only pig and cow juice, and in return, the dragon would spare her daughter. There was something miserable for her wild bloodline, and the sorceress makes a point to comment on it. Meanwhile, outside, Charlotte asks Maid Jack of Lead and patient. She explains that her uncle is coming and he didn't like having visitors there. But the MC doesn't care and says it was very important for him to learn more about her uncle. The girl gets scared by the boy's sudden eagerness to meet her uncle, which she suggests that he approached her just to rob her rich relative. Jack is slightly offended. It's boring to wait, he says, asking her to just talk about the mysterious uncle. And the blonde thinks about what she could say besides the fact that the man is loaded with money. Charlotte explains that he get in the house and brings food every 3 days. She was pagla with 4 lines of the anna juice when she mentioned food. Before Jack can explain the reasons for his curiosity, a voice echoes. The uncle had finally arrived. The gray-haired man asked about the new friend, suspicious of the boy's presence, and comments that he had never seen that boy before. Charlotte gets excited about the man's arrival, even though the tension was clear. Observing him, the MC celebrates the presence of the famous uncle, the little blonde, who attests that his appearance suggested the boy was from some noble house. Jack watches expressionless. There stood the dragon in the sky just as he expected. When the newcomer insists on questioning him, he realizes there was another guest inside the house. And in the room, Vivian asks the doll to call for her Charlotte. Outside, the tension between Jack and the mysterious man was palpable, until his master intervenes telepathically. He responds, informing her of the man's presence, and the woman asks him to bring the child and the man upstairs with him. The stranger questions why Jack was muttering there, to which the boy replies that he only obeys his master, opening the door and calling everyone. Jack knows the man came to absorb his toys in their final moments. Inside the room, the mother tries to speak to Charlotte, but her face shows despair upon seeing the visitor. The man has swipe she looks like she's seeing a ghost, stating that he mourning her fear in her final moment with her own daughter. Charlotte cries desperate at the bedside, asking if her mother was hurt, and begging her to drink the ort juice she brought. Sure, it would make her better. Then one instantly refuses, saying it's okay, thanking her daughter for going out just to buy her birthday gift. The conversation confuses the girl. First is some knowing what's going on, while everyone watches the scene. Originally, they had no reason to be there beyond coincidence, but now they were witnessing an imminent death. Jack directly asks if her name is Vivian, and if he can be trusted with Charlotte, as it was time to act and create a reason for his presence. The woman seems lost till the boy decides to simplify things. Surprising everyone, he asks how she wants her daughter to grow up, as a vampire queen in her rebirth or as a progenitor ruler. And, if neither of those options, did she want the end of the drive-ins who treated vampires like toys? His proposal draws an ironic smile from the driving paisan. Vivian, with difficulty, asks Jack to come closer and explains she always knew her daughter's nature was different from the norm, and she answers that she only wants to see Charlotte happy, smiling, nothing else matters. She asked his name, and upon hearing Jack volunteer, she smiles weakly, entrusting her daughter to him. The MC promises he will take responsibility for the little blonde from now on, so she needn't worry about anything else. Calling Charlotte one last time, Vivian declared her Lun, Ford and Sarlin Victoria about his eyes. The girl screams in despair, trying to hold on to her mother as she fades away, unable to accept what happened. Meanwhile, Jack and Valentine observed in silence, but the fake uncle starts laughing historically at the tragic scene, as if it were hilarious. And he comments on how absurd he was that a brat like that would take responsibility for a child who was also well to pass on. Vampires turning into dry twigs from malnutrition. He laughs as Jack, enraged, punches him with concentrated manner. The blow sends the man flying back. He only cons them the blow's rudeness, calling him a bad influence for Charlotte. When he threatens to teach a lesson, Valentine intervenes, asking his real name, leaving him perplexed. It was peculiar, or there was no trace of magic there. Even so, the doll was speaking to him live. She ignores his reaction and mentions the other 5 dragons who should be in the forest, but clearly weren't. You're only 200 years old. Are you an adult dragon born in that era? She asks, making his eyes flare. How does a doll know such secrets? Who the hell are you, freak? He growls, of all his rage rising to the surface. When Jack hears the insult to his master, hatred completely overtakes his thoughts. Valentine asks to be set on the ground, stating she can stand on her own. She formally introduces herself as Valentine Milos, the ancient mage, making the dragon change his expression. "No way! That immortal necromancer," he asks, unable to believe the revelation. And the one in nouns, as she ordered receiving a name like that. The dragon grits his teeth, accusing her of lying shamelessly about her identity. Saying that mentioned Bahamut and Voldemort, secret names only dragons themselves and those who have seen them would know. This revelation finally makes the man accept the truth, surprised that she was still alive. Finally, he introduces himself as the proud fire dragon of the Maki Valley lineage, the Lactus Maki Valley. He sneers at the poor place, confessing he just wanted to get rid of the child, the unwanted legacy of his toy. Valentine commands him to step back immediately, but the man mocks her, asking if she had forgotten the verbal pact. Because they, superior dragons, shown mercy to the other races besides feeling of pity. So how did she dare command a dragon like him be stepped back? However, Valentine stands firm, saying the man got everything wrong, because the mercy in the story had always been her. The statement enrages the man. She explains the ancient pact and how dragons were never truly merciful. They separate the races because of their arrogance, believing themselves superior to all. She's surprised that even after the war that happened in the past that hadn't improved their bad habits. The draven lass of the history lesson, calling her a ghost of the irrelevant past. Jack, furious, interrupts it, referring to him as a disgusting lizard and explaining he had planned to just listen because he was very polite. However, he questions how a four-legged beast dares to act like a human while being so arrogant in front of his master. The insult makes the dragon promise to tear Jack to pieces, its claws appearing threateningly. Unafraid, Jack charges forward and lands a phenomenal kick, throwing the dragon against the wall. With his foot on the chin of the defeated one, Jack warns, from now on, cheat Valentine with his spit. The dragon spits juice, cursing the boy and questioning how an inferior human dared to do that to a dragon of his stature. Tired of the argument, Jack orders him to stop with the nonsense and look down before he decides to end everything. The dragon, however, grabs his foot and throws him into the air, shouting that he can do whatever he wants just because he has Valentine Malas's support. Charlotte watches everything while crying as the MC comments how wrong would freak out if he saw him this dirty. "Your uncle is irreparable trash. He saw his making the girl fine see the dirty about him." The girl breaks into tears, realizing what had been happening all this time. Jack takes her hand, asking her to take a good look at Galactus, and reveals that monster was responsible for wiping out her people, her father, and treating her mother like a toy. Charlotte tries to defend him, but Jack insists that he only needs her consent and the guy's bloodline now. All that mattered at that moment was the blind's answer. "I'll show you the power of the one who will take care of you," says Jack, charging forward with his sword. However, the vampire is faster, skillful, dodging all of Jack's attacks. The two resume direct combat, but it seems our boy once again fails to hit his target. The mocking vampire comments that after so much talk, he expected more from a mana user, but clearly he was nothing special. Before he can finish the sentence, as Heir falls to the ground, cut by a precise blow. Jack smiles with satisfaction, explaining that the hair was bothering him, and now they could fight seriously. The surprising attack makes Galactus call in the worst names possible, tired of the nonsense. He launches the winds, putting power against Tack. This surprises everyone defending himself. Even Valentine is shocked as the boy cancels the dragon's magic with his own abilities. The battle continues until the boy finally knocks the vampire down, stomping hard on his face. At that moment, he recalls the enemy's identity and confirms it was Galactus Machiavelli, son of Luca Machiavelli from the Forest of Magical Beasts. The revelation leaves the vampire pale upon realizing Jack knows his father. He was one of the 5 ruling dragons, the man of the forest. Jack couldn't forget the dragon he had decapitated in his past life, though he had never encountered this figure before. Given his current state, he must have had a premature departure somewhere, or had been hiding around. The boy asks why the man acts exactly like his father, and he growls, demanding to know who that idea was. Jack introduces himself as the first and last disciple of Valentine Milos, the woman he so despised. A defeated one questions how a human destroyed his soul's speech, a magic of a supposed to be invincible. The soon is pathetic. It didn't even look like he was seeing the strongest life form in the world in front of him. He gives the surrendered man 5 seconds to apologize to his master, pointing the blade of him. Even with his face on the ground, the proud Galactus asks what would happen if he refused to obey. And Jack coldly replies that he would reduce him to dust so thoroughly that no one would ever find the remains, just like he did with a certain someone. The tension is palpable as the countdown proceeds, everyone watching in absolute silence. At the last second, Galactus reveals his dragon wings and takes flight to silent our retreat is there. For now, he should return to the forest and mourn the others. Jack looks up, reluctant to use more mana, but knowing the situation had changed drastically. He then summons the post form of the soul's sword, creating a whirlwind of mana in the sky. That surprises the opponent, who's flying confidently. It was the first of the forms of power from the form realms, beginning with the sky. Galactus looks desperately to the sky, finally understanding what kind of monster he was facing. Inside the whirlwind, everything was black and white, and Velactus couldn't escape out. Terrified, he saw the gigantic figure of Jack chasing him, screaming desperately for him to back off. Suddenly, the boy wakes up startled in an unfamiliar bed in a luxurious room he had never seen before. Confused, he looks around until Ron rushes in, surprised to find him awake. The servant fires off a series of questions about how many fingers he sees, if he remembers anything, how he feels. Jack, annoyed, asks him to stop the interrogation and explains that he's fine, but Moise understands that's going on. His first concern is to ask that the girl and Ekdals, who were with him before. The butler informs him that Charlotte is sleeping in the room next door. He comments that even not knowing exactly what happened, she seemed extremely tired. While Valentine is on the sofa, and the servant points to the green-haired woman to confirm if Jack was referring to that. Our boy smiles when he sees Valentine and greets her with a good morning, which she immediately corrects, stating it's already afternoon, leaving the butler shocked by her ability to speak, and he asks if a lady was angry. The warning responds dryly that he has free to do whatever he wants of his own body, and Jack laughs, teasing her by saying he knew she was worried about his condition. Ron, in trade, asks how a doll could speak and remain motionless for 3 days, something the protagonist says he'll explain later, because what matters now is treating Valentine with the respect she deserves. Ron promises to follow the orders, still confused but trusting his master's judgment. When questioned about recent events, the butler tries to summarize the complex situation. The bodies of the escort were finally found in the mountains, and Masterly and Markless found out about it. So the volunteer family set mics to investigate, and believing that Jack might have a clue, it started tracking him. In addition, several people had seen him below. They followed clues to the INVINCIBLE region, where the epic battle with a dragon in the sky took place. That's when they found the MC unconscious. They didn't know exactly what happened, but he was already in critical condition, so they took him to the temple for treatment. Ron learned that the boy drank 3 high-level portions alone. It tasted like strawberry. The boy comments, laughing at the coincidence with his favorite flavor. Changing the subject, Jack questions what the servant was doing there instead of taking care of Elizabeth as he had promised. The brother is embarrassed to explain that Elizabeth wanted to come, but the Marquis stopped her. In her place, they sent Ron and an investigation squad with the Marquis on support. The revelation surprises Jack. Apparently, his father was even dumber than he thought. The atmosphere grows tense when the red-haired informant, the Marquis, enters the room without warning. What do you want? Jack asks immediately. The spy is surprised to see him awake. Gonzalez introduces himself as the vice captain of the Iron Blood Knights in charge of the investigation. With disdain, questions whether Jack understands that adopting a commoner as a companion is not appropriate for a Marquis. He criticizes the boy's abilities, saying he should at least maintain the dignity of his position. Before anyone can defend Jack, the boy asked for silence and left the redhead speak. Then Gonzalez says he will ask a few questions. According to what the butler newly bought 3 high-level potions for the 40 Lombardster. Therefore, he would only withstand 3 uses. His stance surprises the informant, who remembered when the brat couldn't even look him in the eyes properly. The redhead reveals that Jack was the only survivor of the incident with the guard and demands explanations. The boy responds evasively that it wasn't anything important, just that his escort had received strange orders to break his bones. But he stops mid-explanation, noticing the man's fearful expression, which suggested he wasn't aware of everything. Gonzalez pressures him to continue the explanation. It was pretty wild, right? It comes casually, mentioning what the knight who led the attack at Plant. The informant asks if he's referring to Rizon, and Jack confirms, remembering how they threatened to destroy his manor circle. With complete sincerity, the boy states that he simply finished them all, leaving the redhead in shock. But the boy repeats it, making it very clear that he had no regrets. Now clear that it was an internal act and not external, Gonzalez is stunned that the culprit is Jack himself. It made no sense. I never let anyone who tries to screw over a lie of wise sense ask in a hue accept his joku. The knight warns him to watch his words, calling him a clueless newborn pup. Ron tries to intervene, but is pushed aside and called a disgusting servant, putting Jack immediately on alert. Without hesitation, when the embassy punches the redhead, who falls to the ground, who was the 3rd time he had taken it silently. However, he soon feels dizzy and collapses onto the bed, which worries the butler. The boy assures him that he's fine, and mentioned that the man lying on the floor was just a 7th circle. He asked if Ron is entirely pretending to the powerless servant, making the butler smile. Pulling on his shirt, the boy asked him not to live like that anymore, and confesses that he thought it would be easy for him to go on like that forever, but had reflected enough to know it wouldn't work, arguing that at the very least, the servant should be treated like a person. Ron's face clearly shows that he liked all that freedom. As the butler prepares to act, Jack asks how much time he need to cook the redhead, suggesting 5 minutes, with the guide last joking that it was too much time for his cooking skills. Of cooks and we're talking that food, the suggestion was obvious to have him in prison. Ron dominates Gonzalez by force, even while being called a damn servant repeatedly. The redhead tries to fight back but is always defeated by the butler's 9th circle power. Outside, the guards wonder how a simple servant could cause so much violence. Jack watches the fight with indifference, trying to remember where he had seen those movements before. Even being men's circle, Ron's fundamentals were magical, not martial, though his physique equals average. Gonzalez, a 7th circle knight, should have won hand-to-hand combat but was easily overpowered. Even if he were a spy from the Tolkien Empire, Jack would never be able to win in a fight against the butler. Desperate, the informant grabs one of the guard's swords in an attempt to strike his opponent. But before he could attack, Ron needs the redhead in the nose, utterly humiliating him. Our boy watched with satisfaction. His servant had endured disrespect for years and was now breaking free. Looking at his fallen enemy, Ron turns when called by the protagonist. Why is it taking so long to cook a single ingredient? Jack teased, smiling. However, behind him, Gonzalez is ready to charge. Ron is faster and lands the final blow on the redhead, sending him flying. Needs more training, Jack mocks. Meanwhile, the guards are scolded for just standing and watching. Now alone, the boy grabs the redhead's head, saying it was time for a little chat. He offers a deal, arguing that a capable guy like him could go much further in life. Even humiliated, Gonzalez still tries to a little run until he gets his hair pulled by the boy. Understand your situation now? He asks, still holding him. Then he states his offer. Gonzalez would remain as vice captain and have the chance to develop his manner. He was in his early 30s and would surely make a good vice captain knight, so it would be pointless to finish him off, and asked if he wouldn't like to reach the 8th circle. The knight looks visibly tempted. Jack assures him it would be a secret agreement between the two of them. Beside them, Wrong was suspicious of the young master's intentions but proud of his growth. The scene is interrupted by Valentine, who taps the servant to give attention. He apologizes for not noticing her before, trying to introduce himself formally. He inherited the energy of the sword family, the one Carmen's, leaving him completely disoriented. Valentine deduces that Ron reached the 9th circle 20 years ago, indicating a high rank in the past. You couldn't reach the 10th circle, she says, suggesting he had the potential to become a master. Ron is confused, not understanding what she's saying about soul control. It had been exactly 19 years since he stopped using mana regularly, and only used mana recently to follow Jack because he had no other choice. The butler reflects that he feels no shame, even being disrespected. He chose to serve freely. Valentine asks how he can be satisfied serving that child for the rest of his life. She wondered where so much talent came from, but the answer was obvious. It was someone a member of the sword family was risking his life to protect, so she asks if he already knows the truth about the child. But he only knows what Jack himself told him, maintaining respect for the past that hadn't been shared. Ron smiles, imagining Jack reacting with a "what the hell is sword family?" if he heard that whole conversation. Returning to the redhead, the MC threatens to tear his mouth in a normal situation, but would let it go this time. In Orsican, authors in a position of Feischkaten. Sting the hesitation, he comments that he expects nothing from him, observing his desperate movements. "You're tired of getting beat up, right? Better stay quiet," Jack warns, sitting on the guy's chest. With surgical precision, he locates the 7 mana circles around the redhead's heart. He hoped the man wouldn't think too badly of him for what he was about to do. With Gonzalez's moves, he gets pulled by the boy, who explains that if he wanted to finish the man all, he would done already. Mana surrounds the circles, rearranging them excruciating. All over his eyes, Gonzalez the Skirvels man has 8 circles. It'll hurt for 3 to 5 months, the boy informs, leaving everyone shocked by his power. The informant was stunned by the boy's ability to forcefully create that. However, now he has only one choice: obey every order from the young master or face terrible consequences. And you mentioned the rumors about him being able to manipulate forbidden magic with a frightening smile. Jack remembers when he punched Phelan and the rumor his father spread. Now Gonzalez was confirming it as an undeniable fact. The boy knew how to use forbidden magic. He urmurs the redhead to kneel and pay attention to what he's about to say, because he'll engrave it into his bones if necessary. Gonzalez must return to the Marcus household and lie that the 3rd young master knows nothing. And within 3 months, 40 problematic members of the Marcus family must be eliminated in secret. The redhead agrees until he realizes the trap. Jack had planted something in his heart that meant much more than just a decoration. It was a sentence. "Don't be scared," says the MC, holding his shoulders. "If you obey me, I'll gain enormous benefits." The boy promises that the pain will be worth it, comparing the power of the 8th circle to an addictive drug. Laughing at the knight's paradoxical situation, he says he always knew the guy would want more. Besides that, he remembers how Gonzalez humiliated Wrong during the journey, but now the rules were reversed, and Jack declares that the redhead will be the butler's new servant. And the guy just mutters an acceptance, head lowered. With the deal done, the protagonist kicks Gonzalez out of the room, satisfied to have a new subordinate. He hoped chick number 2 would be more obedient, he affirmed. Turning to run, he asked if he finished his conversation with Valentine, receiving confirmation. Starving, Jack wants to eat, but his question about going out in those old clothes. The mage, always prepared, had already set aside a clean outfit, showing his usual care. Ready to leave, they're interrupted by Charlotte, who hugs the boy with a trembling voice full of concern. "I thought you'd never wake up," she says as he returns the hub move. He orders that their favorite dishes be prepared to share with the vampire girl. He's surprised by how strong the blonde is even without ever drinking real juice. Outside, the orange sky lights their walk as Jack apologizes for destroying her home. However, Charlotte explains that even if it were intact without her mother, the apartment wouldn't be a home. Jack gently holds the girl, revealing that he also lost his mother when he was very young. Charlotte is surprised to hear that even so, he found happiness with his butler and master. He uses Manit to make his juice flow, offering the hungry vampire an unprecedented taste. As soon as she drinks, Charlotte feels a wave of energy ramp through her body, the vampire pyramid umptevade. Vampires rival dragons precisely because of their ability to regenerate instantly with puddin' blood. Despite the confusion, Charlotte smiles brightly, feeling better than she ever imagined possible. Jack asks how she feels about the earlier events when he promised to show his power to prove himself worthy of her responsibility. And the little one reveals she was scared, but it was exciting, and she calls him Appa with innocent admiration. Jack corrects the nickname to Boss, making her laugh with joy as she adjusts to the new title. Inside the mansion, the revelation that Jack defeated an adult dragon leaves Ron shocked. He explains that dragons before the age of 50 are already masters, with fifth circle manor hearts. The dragonoid transformation technique allows them to compact their massive form into human size, optimizing combat. And if a dragon's original form is specialized for using magic, its transformation is a technique that maximizes power and close quarters combat. If that 80 of Galactus hadn't given him time to use so speech, had it been imreusable. Ron insists that Jack eat vegetables, reminding him he's still a growing child. But that doesn't matter, and the MC resumes the conversation, calling the dragon an inexperienced fool. After all, the human was merely second circle and still caused all that damage. Jack notices how strange the conversation is. Normally, killing dragons would be unthinkable. The fire at mercenaries would die of shock if they knew what he'd done. The butler turns red when he realizes the young master deduced his knowledge about dragons, because the thought he knew Aster the everything. However, the boy reminds him that he only shared that the man would have a premature passing, showing how he connected the dots. Ron reflects that there were many secrets his master did not know, and they would remain that way. He was never one to be interested in long stories despite his cautious nature in past lives. Even when they folded together from the Marquess house, the butler kept his secrets tightly guarded. Everyone has the right to their mysteries. Thanks, Jack, but he needed to confirm a crucial suspicion. Looking into the butler's eyes, he directly asks who by ties to the Token Empire. The confusion in Ron's face he's genuine, and he denied any connection to that nation. Jack's relief is palpable, as that concern had weighed on his shoulders for a long time. His calm smile conveys the desire not to burden his oil companion. Despite the post-battle exhaustion, it was time to form a new man of circle. The use of soul energy always drains him, requiring sturdier circles to cushion the impact. Valentine interrupts the boy's thoughts, surprised that he used the Dark Bond, a forbidden magic only the two of them knew. For Shu creative for sought, and Tao Javor that took new bad promises to the very existence of the target. So if broken, it wouldn't just affect their circles, with their entire bodies. The mistress asks what Jack intended by engraving something that Gonzalez's heart, and he reveals that he engraved in the redhead a guarantee to protect Elizabeth and Ron. Ron becomes emotional, understanding how much his young master of Galley is his survival. The scene is interrupted by Charlotte, who enters the room with tears in her eyes, crying after being treated like a doll by the maids. Jack invites her to dinner, like she her feet is, so not age just so matrude. Then he asks the butler that would be possible for Charlotte to attend the academy with the group. Ron hesitates, doubting his ability to arrange such a feat, for he was merely a servant, but the boy argues that he was a very competent servant. Since his praise had no effect, he says that apparently he would have to handle it alone, but he is scolded by the man as he shouldn't resort to blackmail, and he retorts to saying he wasn't a criminal to do that. Charlotte's eyes shine upon hearing about the school, a dream that once felt distant, and he confirms that she would do for children who should plan for the Shalom. A balance fell on this Chubrim to be ignored. Her age would be an obstacle, as the girl was only 11 and the academy accepted students from 14 years onward. But Gonzalez could help with that with a simple letter of recommendation. So he assures her, there's nothing to worry about. A few days later, the group finally arrives at the academy and Ron bids farewell to the boy, handing over his luggage and asking him to take care. He even suggests the boy send a letter if he ever needs anything else, showing concern even in parting. Jack then asked a favor, wanting to leave all matters regarding in Marcus Haas entirely matters of Invincibility. He wanted to be sure the servant understood the boy wished to focus completely on his studies at the academy, free of outside distractions. Ron confirms the request and Jack comments that Gonzalez wasn't as clever as expected, revealing contempt for the redhead. He considers the man merely a disposable pawn, someone to be used and discarded without remorse. AMC also mentions he had given the redhead a specific order, something he wanted the servant to help carry out. The mission involved cutting off hands and legs, but it clarifies he wanted refraining to servant physical lens. In truth, his targets were the officials of the Marcus house and the members of Count Mantis' family. a meticulous and cruel plan. With that, Miss Elizabeth's position would become even more complicated, for she was kind and pure. Jack didn't want her to become like the protagonist of Believe that the fall of that house could be the trigger for a change. He then asked Rong to take good care of her, showing a side that was both protective and calculating. The man sees private to hear his master's words, commenting that he had changed quite a bit since recent events, something Jack agrees with. Upon entering the academy, the doll comments that he had a good monster inside him but could be called a good person. The MC takes the opportunity to compliment the doll, saying she too is a good person, despite her stubbornness. The woman, however, rejects the comment, calling it empty and meaningless, maintaining her firm stance. When Charlotte sees the academy milling, she comments that was her first time in a place like that, showing admiration. Jack asks her to observe everything calmly. I should be attending a place from now on, making her radiant. An academy staff member then approaches, asking if he was from Valenti, and the blonde's response is almost automatic. She runs to hug the boy, while he wonders if the woman wanted something specific with that approach. The staff member asked for permission, informing that the headmaster was waiting for him in his office, revealing certain urgency. The man comments that the boy was well known there, mentioning his dark and striking past. The bloody son of a noble family, found amidst destroyed buildings, has started a recurring topic. Even though some time had passed, the story still echoed, especially before the father of the current Duke Assemble. The former Duke, Rommel Einhard Assemble, still kept that place exactly as it was in his past life. A flashback invades the protagonist's mind, remembering that room and a conversation about an important test. He questioned if that was really all he had to do, complaining about the classes he would miss because of it. The old headmaster, however, assured him that as long as his name was on the official ranking, he would not be expelled. Jack's heavy eyes showed his disappointment, knowing that his older brother and father conspired against him. He surely would try to kill him before he reached adulthood, a cruel reality of the headmaster confirmed. The man had seen many children in the same situation but could only offer a private room as help. Trembling, the boy wondered how he should live from then on, feeling the weight of loneliness and betrayal. The headmaster then passed his head, concluding that it was up to him alone to decide his own path from that point forward. Now in the Kremlin, the boy is more pathering as smiles, proposing a bet to the headmaster, something that surprises him. He explains that he was once in the man's debt and that this was the time to settle it. All the ask in return was a small favor, something that could change the course of things once again. Hearing that, Rommel comments that the boy had changed a lot since he first found him, covered in wounds and barely able to speak. To the headmaster, it might have been only a month, but to Jack, it was 20 years. Enough time for landscapes and people to transform. Interested in the proposal, the old man asked exactly how he would save his life, since, if he was right, the kingdom would fall within a month in the war against the Empire. The kingdom of Tesla may have fought bravely, but the Empire had 30 masters, many of them hybrids with dragon blood and bones implanted. In addition, Tolkien had over 1,000 Manning users above this 7th circle, while Teslan barely had 2 masters and fewer than 100 high-level warriors. With such a brutal difference, 1 month was more than enough. In fact, 3 days would suffice at the protagonists were a Telkin commander. The only reason Teslan had resisted so long was Headmaster Rommel and his army of battle majors, around 700 soldiers trained by him. Without the accident, or rather the betrayal, of his most trusted advisor, the kingdom could have lasted another 2 months. Upon mentioning the traitor's name, the headmaster's eyes widen, scolds Jack for addressing an instructor by name, but the boy remains unfazed. He calmly explains that British Marcos was a Telkin spy, current vice instructor of the swordsmanship department, 6th Circle Knight, and Vassal Assemble. Ramo retorts, saying that was slander and that Jack would regret not listening, but the boy merely smiles. In a few years, when he stabs you in the back, you think, I should have listened to that boy. EMC taunts, augmenting the old man's patience. The headmaster of Furious advises him not to do anything he can't take responsibility for, preferring to pretend the conversation if not her happened. In the end, he releases the boy, pulling on a pocket watch with a crest and affirming he would not repeat his words. Seriously, he asked him to summon Brutus to his office, and so the boy does. Inside the room, the man faces them, starting the compliments on the protagonist's good work, but informing him there was no longer a need to send reports to the Empire. The man's expression is priceless. He freezes, asking what the teenager is talking about, but Jack just laughs. Out of patience, the boy says the man wasn't deaf, just kind of dumb, asking him to make things easier, and realizing he had been discovered. Brutus tries to defend himself, suggesting Jack suffered psychological trauma and warning of the consequences of the accusation. But the boy, short-tempered, already loses his patience, and before the spy can finish his speech, Jack throws the watch in his face and declares that he talks too much for a traitor. That takes the man by surprise, but the protagonist remains impassive, not fully understanding the situation unfolding before him. Bernardo asks his superior for explanations, but before him but any answer, Jack lunges with a precise strike to the man's chest. The boy immediately regrets the attack, but it's already too late, and he charges again, questioning what the MC thought he was doing. Agile, the boy easily dodges the counterattack, leaving the instructor even more surprised by the unexpected skill of the child. At that moment, Jack is able to perceive the sixth circle mana protecting the man's body, but he knows that even the strongest have their weaknesses. Taking advantage of that, he delivers 2 brutal blows to the opponent's stomach, drawing him fawn and excessive force. All that violence leaves the old headmaster stunned, while our boy remains calm, determined to extract a confession from the spy. It's almost painful to see the man's state, now lying on the ground, his face marked by the beating just took. Then the boy insists that he confess already, making it clear that there is only one chance to leave alive by...
And that wraps up today's journey through the realm. If you enjoyed this tale, be sure to pain face and comment your favorite moment, and subscribe to become a true realm warrior.